There's been a lot of controversy over the last few months. The internet's been ablaze with speculation. I think it's important to get it up top. What is happening with the state of the adenosine system research within the first 90 minutes of the day?
Adenosine is an incredibly interesting molecule. It exists in the brain and body. It accumulates with the number of hours that you're awake. So the longer you're awake, the more adenosine accumulates. It does many things in the brain and body. One of the most important things that it does is to give us the subjective experience of feeling sleepy and the objective feeling of our body being fatigued, of feeling literally heavier, requiring more energy to move ourselves. When we sleep and when we allow ourselves to go into states of deep rest that are similar to sleep, we can talk about this, the adenosine system is adjusted so that there's less effective adenosine circulating or bound to adenosine receptors. Okay, so this sort of adenosine 101. There's a lot more to it, but that's sufficient for what we need to talk about for now. The drug, the most commonly used drug, the drug we're using now and that we're on right now, caffeine, which is consumed by, it's estimated, more than 90% of the world's adult population, effectively works by blocking the adenosine receptor. There's some nuance there, but we can think of it that way for simplicity's sake. And in doing so, it prevents the sleepiness-inducing actions of adenosine. However, when caffeine wears off, the adenosine that was around trying to bind to those receptors is still around. In fact, it's accumulated even more, which at least partially explains the so-called caffeine crash, or the dip in energy, the fatigue that we experience maybe 3 or 4 hours after consuming caffeine. Okay. As I mentioned before, when we go to sleep at night, adenosine is cleared from our system. There was a lot of debate over the years about why we sleep. In fact, the great Matt Walker wrote the book, Why We Sleep. And a lot of that has to do with the cell biology of regulating potassium and other ions that are in neurons. And for those that are interested in the cell biology, it's about readjusting the amount of potassium inside and outside the cells, which is happening on an ongoing basis. But you could think of the time that we sleep as doing many things, but one of the most important things is to bring those adenosine levels down. Whatever adenosine has accumulated, to bring it back down such that when we wake up in the morning, we feel alert. Okay, there are a lot of reasons why we feel alert. Some of them we can call pro-alertness mechanisms, like the release of cortisol. Some of them are about removing the brake on wakefulness, like reducing adenosine. Here we're talking about removing the brake on wakefulness by reducing adenosine. So let's say, what time do you go to sleep at night typically? If you add your way.
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock. And what time do you typically wake up feeling great with no alarm clock?
6:30, 6:45.
Great. So let's say you go to sleep at 10:30 and you wake up at your usual time. Chances are you will have cleared a lot, but not all the adenosine that's required for you to wake up feeling very alert. Let's say you stay up a little bit later. Maybe you stay up until 11. Maybe you wake up twice that night to use the restroom for whatever reason. You consumed a bit more fluid. Maybe it takes an extra 10 minutes for you to fall back asleep the second time. And then you wake up in the morning and you didn't get the total amount of deep sleep and rapid eye movement sleep that you're used to getting. Without question, your levels of adenosine upon waking are going to be slightly higher than they normally would. Okay, once you understand what adenosine does, you think about that scenario, it's kind of an obvious thing. However, most people don't sleep until they naturally wake up feeling refreshed. Most people are using an alarm clock. Most people are not going to sleep as early as they need to, or sleeping as late as they need to, or both. So as a consequence, when you wake up in the morning, your adenosine levels are not zeroed out to the place where you would be maximally awake. There is a lot of, or some, residual adenosine present. What do people typically do? Typically, people get out of bed, they might look at their phone. As you know, I encourage them to go find sunlight if the sun isn't out, to turn on bright lights and then get outside and get sunlight in their eyes as soon as they can. But chances are they're going to grab some caffeine. They're going to pour themselves a cup of coffee, or they're going to have some, if you're me, yerba mate. They're going to perhaps have an energy drink, all fine and good. But now think about what we just said, which is that what you're doing then is blocking the adenosine receptors effectively. And whatever residual adenosine was there because you didn't sleep enough to clear it out, persists. Plus, you're now starting to accumulate more adenosine such that by mid-morning, that adenosine has accumulated, the caffeine has worn off, and maybe by early afternoon, especially after a meal, many, not all people experience an afternoon crash in energy, somewhere between 1 p.m. typically and 4 p.m., somewhere in there. For me, the trough in my natural energy levels in the afternoon is consistently between 2 and 3 p.m., regardless of how well I slept the night before. Many people also find a consistently placed trough in their energy independent of all this. Okay, so what can we do? Some years back, I started suggesting that people consider, if they have an afternoon crash in energy, that they delay their morning caffeine intake for 90 minutes after waking. Some years after that, an academic review was published saying, well, there's really no evidence that that specific practice is necessary, but I still think, and I stand by the fact that it can be very useful for those that experience an afternoon crash. Why? Well, two things. First of all, by delaying caffeine for the first 60 to 90 minutes after waking, there's an interesting phenomenon whereby even though you are out of bed and walking around, you're not asleep, if you don't block those adenosine receptors, there's still clearance of adenosine occurring, in part because
it's like
you're
residual rest.
You're sort of still asleep.
Wow.
The other thing that works remarkably well to clear out residual adenosine is upon waking, if you don't feel rested enough, to do something I've talked also a lot about, which is another one of these zero-cost tools that has a growing amount of impressive science to support it, which is non-sleep deep rest, or NSDR, also called Yoga Nidra, which is its proper name. The ancient practice is Yoga Nidra, so we want to be fair to its proper naming. A 10 or 20 or 30-minute Yoga Nidra, or NSDR if you prefer, done upon waking, but before getting out of bed, or maybe you go into the living room and put on your headphones or listen to an NSDR script. They're available all over the internet, done by me, done by a woman named Kelly Boys, who has a really lovely voice. If you prefer a woman's voice, it's actually the one I typically use. You will emerge from that feeling much more rested. Now, Dr. Matt Walker himself and I are collaborating on a project to evaluate how NSDR impacts brain states to see if it actually mimics sleep. There's some beautiful studies already published out of Scandinavia showing that longer Yoga Nidra type practices, non-sleep deep rest, can replenish dopamine stores in an area of the brain called the basal ganglia, which prepares you for mental and physical action. So this is a very well-established tool. From the sort of yogic perspective, it's a tool that's gaining increasing scientific evidence. And it, for everybody I know that has tried this, who reports back to me about it, it's a remarkably energetically replenishing exercise that requires no payment, no nothing, just 10, 20, or 30-minute NSDR. Now, what could be happening in that state? In that state, the body is still, the mind is active, which mimics very closely rapid eye movement sleep. So the test that Matt Walker and I are doing, the experiment, is to see, is having your body completely still but your mind active able to clear adenosine stores in the same way that being deeply asleep is? My guess is that it's not the same, but that it might be a midway effect. That's the hypothesis. We could be wrong. I look forward to seeing the results. So by delaying your caffeine for the first 60 to 90 minutes after waking, but making sure that you hydrate, get your electrolytes, something like Element, which we both enjoy and make good use of, you are clearing out the adenosine that is residual in your system. Now, why do I also keep harping on this idea of going out and getting bright light in your eyes, ideally sunlight, but especially on cloudy days, but if it's not out yet, you can turn on bright lights. Well, when one does that, you actually amplify the naturally occurring peak in cortisol that occurs soon after waking. So about 30 minutes before waking, your cortisol starts to rise. It's part of the mechanism that wakes you up without an alarm clock. As soon as you get out of bed and you start moving around, that cortisol increases further. Your body temperature, by the way, is increasing in parallel. When you view bright light, and these are very well-established studies in humans as well as animal models, but in humans, when you view bright light, 10,000 lux indoor light if you're using a seasonal affective disorder treatment lamp, or getting outside even on a cloudy day and looking toward the sun, looking east in the morning, without sunglasses, eyeglasses and contacts fine, you induce a near 50% increase in the height of that cortisol peak. That might sound like a bad thing because everyone's afraid of cortisol, but that's not a bad thing. It prepares your day, prepares you for a day where your immune system is bolstered, your energy and alertness is bolstered, and your ability to learn and your mood, I maybe said mood twice, forgive me, are bolstered. And in addition to that, there are interactions between light and the adenosine system. Light impacts the functional availability of the adenosine receptor in very interesting ways. Light increases, bright light that is, viewed by the eyes, increases the height of that cortisol peak. And then the cortisol peak also helps to counteract the adenosine system. Now, in addition to that, when you get sleepy at night, part of that effect is due to the increase in melatonin, which is released from the pineal gland, a pea-sized gland midway, sort of deep in the vestiges of your brain. When you view bright light at night or during the day, and especially in the morning, it quashes those melatonin levels. So when you wake up in the morning and you haven't slept enough, or even if you have, your adenosine levels are still not to zero, your melatonin levels are still not to zero, and your cortisol is rising. So you've got a pro-wakefulness system, cortisol, that you can accelerate or amplify rather by viewing bright light. You've got a anti-wakefulness system in the form of melatonin and adenosine that are pushing back on your wakefulness. You're in this kind of like grogginess, and you can further suppress those systems without caffeine by viewing bright light. So viewing bright light both increases the pro-wakefulness systems in the brain and body and suppresses the anti-wakefulness systems in the brain and body, both pushing down on the accelerator of wakefulness and mood and alertness and reducing the brake, right? Otherwise, you're sort of trying to drive with the emergency brake on. Then, if 60 to 90 minutes later, you ingest caffeine, now you're blocking the adenosine receptor. Sure, that's fine. I love caffeine. I certainly drink a lot of caffeine and enjoy it for all its effects. And you're now in a position where the arc of your wakefulness is going to be in nice concert with the also increase in adenosine that's naturally going to accumulate throughout the day. And again, there's no requirement to delay your caffeine 60 to 90 minutes after waking, but for people that experience a marked afternoon crash, it's an incredibly effective way to offset partially or eliminate that afternoon crash.
Well, that's pretty much everybody. Who doesn't get tired in the middle of the afternoon? Tell you what I've done.
Jocko Willink doesn't get tired, period.
Ever.
Yeah, right.
Now, do you think he's got that genetic mutation?
I don't know. I went down to visit him after his podcast. I actually did a sauna session with his family and some of their family friends. And they had heard that I've been pushing the heat in the sauna a bit more. And by the way, I don't recommend this unless you're very heat adapted. I'm not great at the cold. I put my cold plunge at about 48, 45 degrees. Rogan and other people make fun of me for this. Lex is Russian, so he doesn't have to cold plunge. He was born into the cold of Siberia. There's a photo of this actually on the internet. From the time he was young, they were cold conditioning him. That's why he has such a warm heart. But in terms of the heat, I'm pretty heat tolerant. So I've been cranking my traditional sauna to about 210, 220. But mostly 210. I went down there and Jocko challenged me to what he calls the factory reset protocol, which is 30 minutes at 225, brutal. And we had about 8 or 9 bodies in that sauna, so it was probably
claustrophobic.
It was probably hotter than that. I was the one guy down on the floor. All the others, it was men and women, were sitting up there laughing at me, and I almost tapped out. And then they do a 5-minute cold plunge, and they go back and forth 3 times. I did 1 round with them, so I don't recommend it because if you're not heat conditioned, you can give yourself brain damage. By the way, for people that don't know, if you put a towel over your head or you wear one of these banya hats, it actually insulates your brain, so you're able to stay in longer. People think, oh, it must be that much warmer, but you're actually insulating the brain from the heat. So, so Jocko, he's obviously tough. He's, legitimately battle tested, and at the same time, it's remarkable to me how much energy he has. He finished dinner. So we did the sauna. We did a 4-hour podcast. Then we did the sauna cold thing I just described. Then we did dinner. And then he went off to see a Cro-Mag show starting at like 10 o'clock. And then the next morning, of course, he posted his watch. So he does seem to have more energy, or he just forces himself to ignore whatever fatigue
Chronically,
is there.
That seems so unlikely to be able to continue to do that, just sheer will. That it feels like your body would eventually come in. Perhaps I'm not accounting for the will of Jocko. But it's a very small number of people, but there is a genetic mutation that allows certain cohorts to exist on between sort of 3 and 5 hours sleep, and that's just where they're at.
Yeah, very rare. Probably they have very fast adenosine clearance systems. Viewed differently, perhaps they don't accumulate as much adenosine during the day.
Someone test Jocko. Get his blood. I imagine that when you try and get him with the needle, it just bends.
I've talked about some of these before, but the comments on YouTube about Jocko are the best. Like when Jocko was born, the doctor looked at his parents and said, "It's a man."
When he does a push-up, he doesn't lift himself, he pushes the world away.
Right, he doesn't do push-ups, he does earth downs. I've seen that one. And there are a bunch of other ones that are really amusing.
He's the new Chuck Norris.
Yeah, but I think those guys are selected for the teams in part through their ability to, cognitively and physically push aside fatigue. I think for most people, they need 6 to 8 hours of sleep per night, unless growing, teen years, battling some illness, that sort of thing. If ever you're used to going to sleep at 10 p.m. or something, and suddenly at 7 p.m. you feel incredibly tired, you're probably battling something and you should go to sleep. Mm-hmm. I need about 6 to 8 hours, but the other night I got 9. I rarely get 9.
Felt like a superhuman.
Yeah. Typically for me, it's about 7 hours. And then I do this 10 to 20 minute non-sleep deep rest. On the drive over here, I did a 10-minute non-sleep.
Have you ever seen that meme where it talks about the different hours of sleep that you have, and it's got a sort of a face of a guy, and it's 0, his sort of face is falling off, 1 hour, his face is falling off, and it really accurately represents exactly how it feels. 6 hours, face falling off, 7 hours, face falling off, 8, great. But for some reason, and I totally agree with this, 2 hours, the guy's fucking superhuman. Oh, yeah. The dude's, and I'm like, what is it about that period? Mm-hmm. It just seems like maybe it's the 90-minute, like up and down. It allows you to really align that one sleep cycle. And you're like, well, okay, if you're sleeping 2 hours, you know that you're going to feel like shit. You know that this is just, okay, I'm in sort of war mode.
Yeah.
But thinking about the teams guys, Jocko and...
Well, sorry, just to, what I think you're seeing in that somebody sleeps just 2 hours every once in a while and feels really great, you'll notice that they get hyperverbal. It's a mild form of mania before the crash.
No way.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And, we don't talk about this terribly much because rapid eye movement sleep is critical for removing the emotional load of previous day memories and experiences. But rapid eye movement sleep has also been used as a clinical treatment for depression, right? Which is kind of odd because one of the primary symptoms of depression is waking up at 3 or 4 in the morning and not being able to fall back asleep again. So, there's a kind of a mystery in the relationship between sleep and mood, but I think it's fair to say that on average, you need to get sufficient amount of sleep for you. And for most people, that means 6 to 8 hours, plus or minus 2 hours, right? Depending on your age and what else you're dealing with in life. And I think it's also fair to say that if ever you had to stay up all night or you only get 2 hours of sleep, you will probably experience some sort of hypermania for you, and then, or hypomania, talking a lot, feeling really energetic, and then boom,
you're going to get smashed.
Yeah, and then a crash.
Yeah, I mean, I've tracked my sleep in one form or another for a decade. Sleep Cycle, the app on mobile, which is really great, by the way. If anyone's sort of on the road and needs to use an alarm, Sleep Cycle is fantastic. Okay. If you pay for the premium, I'm not a partner, no way affiliated.
No,
but
I just want to give it a try.
I've used that thing for probably a decade. I'm not a fan of using your phone as an alarm clock, but if you're on the road, I've been in hotels a lot recently. It's a good. It automatically triggers recordings when you begin to snore, when you begin to speak in your sleep, and you can play those back, and it just records them and puts them on the cloud for the rest of time. So I have a couple of friends who have full sentences, entire conversations. A very well-known podcaster and previous guest of this show has entire debates in his sleep.
People should post them. We should do the actual sleep podcast.
Trying to get him to put them online because they are so funny. But I love Sleep Cycle, and that's great. I think I've averaged over a decade about 6 hours 45 of active sleep.
Great.
But I was a club promoter for a long time. That 6 hours 45 was closer to probably 6, and now 7:30. So I'm kind of splitting the difference from my previous life to my new one. One of my favorite tweets from you is, don't ask people how they are doing, ask how they are sleeping. You'll learn a lot more.
Yeah, you get a window into what's really going on for them, because we have this throwaway response to how are you doing? I'm like, I'm okay, or I'm great, or yeah, I'm fine. When you ask how people are sleeping, it speaks to a bunch of previous day and week experiences and how they're integrating all that. The mighty Rick Rubin always asks, how are you feeling? Which I really love. I'll get these texts like, how are you feeling? And I'm like, that's interesting. And I start responding. It forces you to think a little bit. When we are emotionally troubled. We sleep less well, obviously. I feel like there are a lot of us, myself included, that would like to just take a long nap until after this upcoming election.
3-month nap.
Yeah, it's really important to see what's going on back and forth, but sometimes it just feels so emotionally distracting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I definitely chart my sleep. I use the tracker inside of 8 Sleep.
Yep. Have you got that new thing that lifts your head up?
I do, because I have a snoring issue. I didn't know I had a snoring issue. Yeah, I mean, it's not terrible, but I didn't know I had a snoring issue. And then I started using the nose strips.
That helps me.
Yeah, but then I made the mistake of taking one of those off far too quickly, and I had a nice like linear size strip removed from my nose. Yep. That was good. They can help. They actually can really help, because it reduced the percentage of my night that I was snoring from something like 22% down to like 11%.
Was that based on what the 8 Sleep report was?
Yeah. But now with the new 8 Sleep, it tilts you up. And that really helps.
Wow.
Yeah, that really helps.
Intake make great nose strips. So there's a hard piece of plastic. It's a molded piece of plastic. And then you put 2 magnets either side of your nose.
So pulling your nostrils.
And this shit locks you in. And then Alex Hormozy, who has 2 deviated septum.
Is that why he always wears that?
Correct. Because
I was wondering why he wears it in the daytime.
He can't breathe really very well without it. It's like one's 100% blocked and the other's something else. And he's found some other thing that goes inside your nose and opens it out from there. He says he can only use it 2 nights in a row, or else it starts to sort of cut away at the inner lining of his. Goodness. He's like, those 2 nights, really, really good breathing.
Yeah, getting a lot of oxygen to your brain during sleep is part of the optimal sleep routine. It's just that sometimes the number of different things that one needs, earplugs, eye mask, nose, it can get to be a bit much. Whenever I'm on the road, I know the most important thing for me in hotels is to try and get a hotel where the window faces east in the morning and the window opens. I have this weird kind of morning anxiety if I can't get fresh air. So you can always go downstairs and go outside, but the little things make a big difference. I think this is one of the things that's so dreadful about being on a plane for many hours, is that you can't, it's all the short wavelength light, the blue light, plus you can't open the window, then you're in an airport, then you're in an Uber, and you really think about just how unhealthy that is. So as I'm 49 next month, and I feel pretty good. Probably haven't been getting as much sleep as I should have this last year, but getting more fresh air, just that simple, I can't even call it a biohack, right? Yep. Just getting more fresh air and sunshine has made an enormous difference in my nighttime sleep.
It's the sort of advice that your mum would have given you. Just get more fresh air.
Yeah, she used to kick us out of the house. We'd come home, we were watching cartoons or something, and then she'd just say like, all right, you're leaving. Like I'm kicking you out for her own peace of mind. And then,
Traveling should be about the journey, not the chaos of packing, which is why I have been using Nomatic's Backpack and Carry-On Pro for over a year now. This thing is the best backpack on the planet. I did an entire month on tour on just hand luggage alone. It's like the Swiss Army knife of travel packs. They've got pockets for your laptop, your clothes, your snacks. It is so well organized that even your toothbrush feels important, and the amount of thought that they've put into every pouch and zipper is incredible. It's beautifully designed, it's not over-engineered, and it will literally last you a lifetime with their lifetime guarantee. So this is the final backpack that you will ever buy. Plus, they also offer international shipping, free shipping on orders over $49 in the United States. And if you don't like it for any reason, you can return or exchange it within 30 days. So you can buy it completely risk-free, fill it with all of your possessions, and if you don't like it, they'll give you your money back. Right now, you can get a 20% discount by going to the link in the description below or heading to nomatic.com/modernwisdom and using the code MW20 at checkout. That's nomatic.com/modernwisdom and MW20 at checkout. Just sort of related to what we've spoken about there, how can people become a morning person or learn to get up early more easily and more regularly?
Yeah. 3 days of pain, the rest is easy. So it takes about 3 days to shift the biological mechanisms to make you a morning person. Now, if you are a very strongly genetically determined night owl.
That's a thing?
That's a thing. So there are genetic mutations, they call them polymorphisms, that make some people night owls. They feel best psychologically and physically going to sleep at about 1, 2, or 3 a.m. and waking up somewhere around, 10, 11 a.m. or noon. Mm-hmm. That exists. Not just during development or teen years, but that exists. Not just for social reasons. Other people are true morning people. They feel absolutely best going to sleep around 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. 10 p.m. would be late for them and they feel great waking up at 4, 5, or 6 a.m. Okay. Most people feel best going to sleep somewhere between 10 and midnight and waking up somewhere between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. or so, maybe 5:30 to 8 a.m. Okay. So those are 3 bins of the night owl, the morning person, and then the more typical schedule, but it's heavily weighted toward that typical schedule if you look at the general population. So if somebody wants to get up earlier, you need to stack the 4 primary, what are called Zeitgebers or timekeepers. So named because some of the early chronobiologists that discovered this stuff and the underlying mechanisms were German, as it were. So the number one Zeitgeber, the number one way to shift your circadian clock, which is this cluster of neurons that sits a few centimeters above the roof of your mouth, is to view bright light at a time when you want to be awake, AKA the morning. Okay. So that's why I say get outside, look at the sun, toward the sun. Don't force yourself to stare at it. Don't damage your eyes. Blink as needed. No sunglasses. Eyeglasses, corrective lenses, and contacts are absolutely fine, even if they have UV protection. Okay. However, if you combine that with another Zeitgeber, the second most powerful Zeitgeber is exercise or movement. So if you do some jumping jacks, you skip some rope, or you even just take a walk while facing the sun, now you're starting to stack different Zeitgebers. And I'll explain the mechanisms in a moment. If you then also add caffeine, now this spits in the face a little bit of what I said a few minutes ago, but if you were to add caffeine, you can entrain, as it's called, the circadian clock to be alert at that time a bit more. And I'll be honest, if I'm going to exercise first thing in the morning, I need caffeine. I can't wait that 60 to 90 minutes. If I need to jump right into exercise, I find it's easiest for me to do 30 minutes after waking, 3 hours after waking, or 11 hours after waking. And a lot of people find that the same. But of course, exercise when you can, because it's that important. But if you want to, quote unquote, optimize your energy levels for exercise, typically people will notice that has to do with your temperature rhythm. Okay, so we've got sunlight, we've got exercise or movement of any kind. It could be jumping jacks, could be walking. You don't have to do a full workout. And then caffeine, and in some cases, food. I'm not big on eating first thing in the morning. I don't like to eat until 11 a.m. or noon. That's when my first meal arrives for me. Just naturally, that's when I get hungry. It's all caffeine and hydration prior to that. But if you were to eat something first thing in the morning, that's part of the way you entrain your circadian clock to wake up, to essentially wake you up earlier. And then the fourth one is a social rhythm. If you're interacting with other people, you're going to entrain your clock to that as well.
No way.
Yes. So there's a social component to it, circadian entrainment. Now, the pathways for these are from the eye, in the case of viewing light, to the circadian clock, the suprachiasmatic nucleus. In the case of caffeine, it's more general. In the case of exercise, there's literally a brainstem to circadian clock connection, a superhighway of neuronal connections that then so-called entrains your circadian clock. Remember, your circadian clock generates an intrinsic 24-hour rhythm such that if we put you into constant dark or constant light, you would still sleep for a given bout and then be alert for a given bout with a little bit of a nap. It just is what we'd call free run. It would drift a little later each day. This is what happens when you go to Vegas. This is what happens when you're in an environment without a lot of cues about the day, the sunlight rising and setting cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Sunlight, exercise, caffeine and eating, and social interactions bring your circadian clock into alignment with all of those Zeitgebers. So when I said it takes 3 days, if tomorrow you want to start beginning the process of becoming an early riser, you'd set your alarm for 5 a.m. No matter what time you went to sleep the night before, you're going to get up and you're going to do the 4 things that I described. Maybe leave out food if you don't want to eat. Maybe leave out caffeine if you want to delay by 90 minutes. It's going to hurt. And then by the early afternoon, you'll be dragging a bit. And you just have to be careful to not overindulge in caffeine, which will then cause you to fall asleep later. Then you want to go to sleep at your now naturally slightly earlier sleep time. The next day, you'll notice it'll be a little bit easier to do the morning routine I just described. And by the third day, you ought to be waking up with or before the alarm by a few minutes or moments, because your circadian clock has phase shifted. Okay. It's phase advanced, as we say. Your circadian clock intrinsic to you generates a 24.2 or a 24.3 hour rhythm. It's not perfectly 24 hours. And that we believe, we don't know, but the just so story is that it's such that you're able to then shift that clock in in one or the other direction. You can phase advance, so you wake up earlier and go to sleep earlier. You can phase delay. How do you phase delay? Well, you're probably doing this already. Everyone nowadays pretty much qualifies as a shift worker by the strict and not so strict criteria of shift work, which is, are you doing any kind of cognitive activity after 9 p.m.? Are you viewing any kind of bright lights after 9:30 p.m.? Most people would say yes. So the diabolical thing about the circadian timing system is that it requires a lot of bright light, ideally from sunlight, but a lot of bright light early in the day to make you a morning and daytime person. But it requires just a little bit of bright light, even from an artificial source, after the hours of about 9:30 p.m. till 4 a.m. to quash your melatonin and make it difficult to sleep, or if you sleep, to make that sleep not as effective. There's a simple remedy, however, which is, and this is a beautiful study published in Science Reports in 2022, if you view sunlight in the afternoon, even for 5 minutes or so, could be late afternoon, could be sunset, take off your sunglasses, look in the direction of the sun, so now looking west, you adjust the sensitivity of your retina, the neurons in the back of your eye, such that bright light later at night doesn't have quite as much effect to suppress melatonin. It reduces the melatonin suppressive effects by about 50% or offsets those. So I think of this afternoon viewing as, well, first of all, it's nice to look at a sunset. If you're indoors in an environment like this, even if there are bright lights on, get outside for a few minutes before the sun sets. This is especially important in winter. Even if you can't see the sun as an object, get some sunlight in your eyes, and that will at least partially offset the effects of bright light in your eyes at night, partially. And I refer to this more or less as your Netflix inoculation, so that night you can be on your phone or watch Netflix and it's not going to disrupt your sleep as much, but it will still disrupt your sleep somewhat. But let's, unless, like Rick Rubin's very diligent about wearing the red lens glasses. I've started doing that as well. But if you don't do that, well, I'm guessing he also sees the sunset in the evening. He's very attached for good scientific reasons to the sunlight thing. But these are little things that take just moments, right? They're essentially zero cost that can really improve your sleep. But that's how you become a morning person. If you want to become a night person, you do the opposite. You view bright light between the hours of 4 p.m. and 10 p.m. and then you will phase delay or phase shift in a delayed way your circadian clock, making you want to wake up later the next morning.
I wonder if dogs count as social interaction.
Absolutely. And they have all of the same mechanisms we just described.
So I just thinking, how can we stack that everything first thing in the morning walk?
Yeah.
If you're in a place that's not Iceland or somewhere that's super high north, dog, social interaction, moving around, and then caffeine if you do or if you don't want it. But
if you have a dog that likes to run, you're even better off because it'll force you to run.
You're gonna have to chase after it.
If you have an English bulldog like I did, you'd be lucky if you get out of bed by 10.
A little bit, yeah. You're in.
Their eyes are droopy. They don't like to move. But it is the case that dogs will naturally orient toward the sun. And people always ask, do dogs have the same mechanisms? Absolutely. Intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, the one that project to the clock and carry all of this thing about circadian entrainment to sunlight, are present, as far as we know, in every extant mammalian species, every mammalian species that's alive today. This is a system that evolved from bacteria that's very similar to the opsins, the light-absorbing molecules that are in the insect eye. It's a very primordial system. It's organized very differently anatomically in the retina. And to me, it's actually one of the more beautiful systems in all of us. In fact, the one thing that no one can seem to defeat, you're never going to biohack away, is circadian biology. This 24-hour fluctuation in energy and focus. Some people require less sleep, but we're all more or less a slave to these mechanisms. And, it's a good thing that we are, because it forces us to rest. Neuroplasticity occurs during sleep. It pushes down adenosine. It takes us through these natural ebbs and cycles of cognition. I'm obsessed by the idea that in sleep, the conscious mind obviously is not in control. The unconscious mind can geyser up thoughts. The brain is organizing things more in terms of symbols. Time and space are very organized very differently in dreams. And there's a lot of information to be gleaned from dreams. It's just that we don't yet understand what the symbols mean, the kind of classic Freudian Jungian interpretations are certainly not going to be complete, but I'm so grateful that we get this thing called sleep. And I think thanks to the great Matt Walker, we now understand that the whole thing about sleep when I'm dead is a really dumb mindset. And, my team at the Huberman Lab podcast, we sometimes joke that we win by sleeping. When we're in the peak of things, we all encourage each other to get rest, get rest. Like we really prioritize sleep. It's so essential.
One of the best little cliches there, which is too much of a generalization, but I think works, is there's no such thing as being overworked, only underrested.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I like that a lot. I also think that, we know a lot about the different stages of sleep. We know less about the different stages of wakefulness. I've recently started embracing my natural cognitive and physical cycles. And I've come to realize, and I think Ed Milet says he does this, but he thinks of his day as consisting of 3 days, which is awesome from the productivity standpoint. I noticed that also because he mentioned these time blocks. So I just want to,
you've got a new daily routine.
Yeah.
What's your routine?
Yeah. So I came to realize by observation, right? I didn't force this. So this is something I observed in myself, which is that from 6 a.m. until noon, my brain is very capable. My body is very capable of doing certain things far more easily than at other times of the 24-hour cycle. So I consider that sort of the first phase of my day. Sometimes I'm up by 6, sometimes it's 7, sometimes it's 8. Usually it's about 6:30. So I consider that one opportunity block. The second opportunity block is between noon, or because I eat lunch typically around noon, between 1 and 6 p.m. or noon and 6 p.m. So second opportunity block. And then the third is between 6 p.m. and bedtime, which for me typically is 10:30, but sometimes late. I'm half Argentine. Sometimes I go to bed at midnight and I just go, I'll take a nap the next day. I mean, you have to live. I mean, come on. So what I started to realize is that I can do really focused work in 2, but not 3 of those blocks consistently. I also noticed that if I exercise early in the first block, like between 6 a.m. and before 9 a.m., I have more energy all day long. This is what I observed experimentally on myself. But if I exercise starting at 9 or starting at 10, so halfway through that block, the second opportunity block is diminished. I'm kind of dragging. Maybe it's related to when I eat, but that wasn't changing when I eat or what I eat. So I do think that people could benefit tremendously, not necessarily by following the schedule that I follow, but by paying attention to their natural cognitive and physical rhythms. And so as a consequence, what I now do is I take a look at the day. Like for instance, this is afternoon. We sat down together here at 1. I think we're probably somewhere around 2 p.m. I don't know, somewhere around there. But I realized, okay, I could work before I got here in this early day block or this evening. What I chose to do this morning was kind of more procedural things. Took care of some posting for our Monday episode, took care of some phone calls. I took a walk, took care of some email, made sure I ate some food before I came here. On the way here, I did a brief 10-minute NSDR because I didn't sleep quite as much last night as I would have liked, but I walked in feeling great. And I don't get paid to endorse, but nor did we have any kind of arrangement to say this, but this new tonic energy drink I'm loving. It's really good. It's also got an eye on it.
Yeah,
I'm hyped. Love it. Really tasty. It tastes so good. So I can work 2 of these 3 blocks. And then the third one ends up being kind of a mishmash of procedural stuff. So today, the early part of the day, the 6 a.m. to noon block was kind of like handled doing it's work, but it's not like focused work stuff. And I didn't train today because I trained yesterday. And today was a day off in any case. Hopefully we'll do some sauna cold tonight. So now we're working, I'm focused. And I imagine that, 2, 3, 4 hours of this, and my brain will have, expended some pretty serious cognitive effort. And then I'll take a little bit I'll expect a sort of dip in energy. I won't force it. And then this evening, I'll get some work done and then hopefully we'll do some sauna cold. So I'm very aware of the fact that I get sort of 2 opportunities from these 3 blocks. Mm-hmm. Now, my ideal schedule would be to work in the first 2 blocks really, really hard. Still eat, still train early. So it would be train early, work in the first block. So get the training done by 8 a.m., no later. Work, super focused work. Then eat something, super focused work in the second block, maybe do an NSDR to recover my mental and physical vigor. And then in the evening,
social time,
relax. Connection. I've been watching a lot of documentary.
What have you been watching?
I watched a Anthony Bourdain documentary yesterday. I obviously knew who he was. We have friends in common. He's sadly passed away, but took his own life, which is tragic. But I was aware that, because Joe's talked about him a lot. David Cho, the artist, has talked about him a lot and is in that documentary. He also was part of the New York City, 70s, 80s punk rock scene. So the Ramones, I'm a huge Ramones fan, Joe Strummer, like kind of that ilk. And the documentary is called Roadrunner, and it's very, very good. And it's also very interesting to see how he was such a sensation seeker. You could almost feel him veering toward something. And then, and
I've never watched any of his documentaries.
Yeah, very, very good. And very, very good.
Have you seen, just to interject, have you seen World War II from the front lines?
No.
So this is Netflix. Netflix have done at least 2 or 3 colorized World War II documentaries. In fact, there's one that's World War I.
I saw that one.
Yes. So at least 3, World War II in color, the Great War in color, and something else. All of these will be available on Netflix. Watching archive footage, there's something distancing about seeing it in black and white. It sort of reminds you that it's not now.
Right.
And they've used a combination of AI and manual recolorers to be able to sharpen the image. Everything's 4K. The facial appearance of everyone, the emotions that you can see on their face, the smiles, their teeth, and now in color as well, to me just drives home that story in a manner that I've never watched a documentary about something from that era and felt so emotionally connected to it, which is interesting. So I've really been enjoying that. Shane
World
Gillis,
War II from the front lines?
Yes.
Okay, because the World War I doc I really liked. I read All's Quiet on the Western Front, of course, when I was in school. I'm fascinated by World War I. Documentary, it's kind of an obsession. I love the Oliver Sacks documentary. I've seen some others recently.
What about true crime? Are you a true crime guy?
I used to watch that stuff when I was living alone, and then it was like, then you're kind of like you checking closets and stuff. Yeah. I don't know if it's good for me to watch that stuff. It can be interesting. The one that they did about Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker,
fucking brilliant,
terrifying, especially given that it's in Los Angeles, and just the brazen nature of his
There's
attacks.
a new one I just watched called American Nightmare.
Yeah, I don't want to see this, man.
Oh, yeah. It's really interesting and harrowing. But Shane Gillis warns that watching World War II documentaries is early onset Republican. That's what he refers to having an obsession with World War II documentaries as early onset Republican. Okay. So you just need to track that in your mind. If you start sort of shouting MAGA in your sleep and your sleep cycle picks it up.
Yeah, unlikely. But I'll look at it in an unbiased way. How's that?
For the last 3 years now, I have started my morning every single day with Element. It is a tasty electrolyte drink mix with everything that you need and nothing that you don't. Each grab and go stick pack contains a science-backed electrolyte ratio of sodium, potassium, and magnesium with no sugar, no coloring, no artificial ingredients, or any other junk. Sodium plays a critical role in reducing muscle cramps and fatigue while optimizing brain health, regulating appetite, and curbing cravings. That's why it's relied on by Olympic athletes and FBI sniper teams and Andrew Huberman and Lex Friedman and Dr. Mike Israetel, of all people, and millions more. Best of all, there is a no questions asked refund policy with an unlimited duration, so you can buy it for as long as you want. Try it all, and if you do not like it for any reason, they'll give you your money back, and you don't even need to return the box. That's how confident they are that you'll love it. Right now, you can get a free sample pack of all 8 flavors with your first box by going to the link in the description below or heading to drinklmnt.com/modernwisdom. That's drinklmnt.com/modernwisdom. We're in an election year at the moment. I think as much as you might want to fall asleep for the next 3 months. And
no, I was just sort of joking. I mean, the political process is critical. It's just been, it's been a lot.
I don't think that it's unfair to say that. I think a lot of people hold this sort of cognitive superposition, which is, I understand the future of the country is very important, and I, as a person with a vote, need to be an active participant. That's the whole reason for doing it. And also, this is exhausting, and it's sapping an awful lot of my will to live, and I feel kind of overloaded. Have you looked at any strategies, spoken to anybody that has any psychological tools to be able to deal with a rapid media cycle, sort of very activating stories? Basically, how can people psychologically manage this upcoming period? What would you suggest?
Yeah, I actually hosted a guest who is expert on the psychology of politics. It was super interesting. And we looked at all of this through the lens, a completely nonpartisan lens, because we have listeners on both sides of the aisle and probably some who are undecided. First of all, the fervor around this upcoming election, the intensity of everything, certainly convinced me that I'm never going to run for office. Despite some speculation out there from friends and family and some occasional calls from reporters. No, it's not my arena. But it's obviously a very important one. And one of my concerns is that if the intensity around all of this continues to increase as much as it
I can guarantee you it's going to.
Yeah, that young people who would consider running for office out of a genuine desire to serve might be dissuaded. Because you hear these things like, oh, it's impossible to get anything done, or in order to be effective, you have to be this, that, and the other kind of person. And that's a terrible message. It might be true, but it's a terrible message, because I think ultimately what you want in any field, right, whether or not you're talking about music or sport, I mean, we're seeing this with the recent Olympics, or podcasting, you want a big pool of people funneling into it so that you can discover the incredible talents and virtuosos, and so that's what you need, is a bigger applicant pool, right, to reveal talent and for a field to progress. Okay, enough editorializing. I think the best thing that one can do to navigate this whole cycle is to pay careful attention to what draws attention. And what I learned from this expert, is a political science professor, is that what you're listening for and what people are orienting towards is dominance language. But the dominance language over others is far less effective, believe it or not, in shifting people's minds than the dominance language associated with expressing one's true beliefs. So their argument was, if you look historically at presidential and other forms of election, and by the way, I'm paraphrasing now, so that you could predict who was going to win based on who told you what they really think and believe, as opposed to telling people what they want to hear. Like, I think that we have a sensor for when we're being told what people think we want us to hear versus what somebody really believes, even if we disagree with them. And, this probably gets to our origins as a old world primate species, but we tend to put leaders into office who can communicate either through their words or through the, timbre of their voice, or through their gestures, or a combination of things. Maybe it's redundancy and how often they hammer on a message, what they really believe, as opposed to flip-flopping, according to what the polls say, or
blowing with the wind.
Right. So I think we hear the words dominance language and we default to, oh, it's about one person kind of, dominating the other person. Now, ultimately, it's a competition between mostly two people, or we have a third party in this country, but it seems to be boiling down to two at this moment. And so this thing about dominance language is often couched as dominance over the other in a given scenario, over a given topic, in separate venues, at one gathering versus another. But what this, I consider, brilliant political science professor was explaining is that the dominance is really exerted and impacts voting at the level of one or the other candidate, perhaps both, expressing what they really believe about something in clear terms.
With conviction.
And it being true. I think this is the sort of thing that they can't fake ultimately. And that where people lose faith in a candidate is when that candidate, says, well, at one point, I said this, but now I'm saying this, and they don't give a reason that feels legitimate to their actual beliefs, or they don't address it. Right. Or they don't address it, or they simply focus on the beliefs of the other candidate. So my strategy in this current election is to put, as I do for many, not all things in life, much to the dismay of people in my life, a neuroscience lens, a psychology lens, a science-based lens on what's happening around me. And I'm listening for, does that sound true in the sense, does it really sound like that candidate really believes that? Or does it sound like they're trying to tell me this? Or are they spending more time talking about what the other candidate believes or doesn't believe in an effort to sway me? Because ultimately, yes, there does seem to be some, and this guest pointed it out as well, that there is a tendency to orient towards people that we recognize, that feel similar to people we grew up around, but that's not actually the thing that impacts voting in the end. That ultimately, the people who are undecided, because there is always going to be a group of people who are voting against the other party, period. They're just literally voting against one party. But I do think that there's this group in the middle, and I didn't coin this term, but Dr. Paul Conti, who was on my podcast as a psychiatrist, and yours, talks about the League of Reasonable People, it has nothing to do with politics per se, but this is a group of people who are really evaluating evidence on the basis of what they see and what they feel and what they hear, and trying to move away from the silent middle, that, and so people that are trying to evaluate evidence and are really paying attention to, does this person feel genuine? Do they really believe this? Or are they telling me this because it's what I want to hear? I think that's the way I plan to navigate this time.
How will that help with psychological health? Using that, you're still going to be peppered with the story and the worry and the concern, and here's a new, and I've got to forget the last thing, but it's still in my mind, and there's a new thing, and I got to spin all of these different news stories. Yeah,
great question. In a very Paul Kantian way, it gives you agency. It gives you a sense of control over the fire hose of information that's coming at you. You can say, okay, there's nothing I can do about the fire hose. There's nothing I can do about getting just blasted back with all this information, but I'm going to apply a very specific filter to try and hear what people are saying about specific issues that matter, and paying attention to whether or not they're telling me what they really believe. You can disagree with them and vote against them, or you can vote for them. But ultimately, the data show, as I understand, that people ultimately are voting for the candidate that they believe has the greatest conviction. And what I think has been lacking, frankly, in the political discussion, and I say this as a citizen, not as a political scientist, but as a citizen who votes, has been a clear picture of what the future could look like if a given candidate wins. I want a vivid picture of the world they imagine. I don't want this like surface level stuff, like imagine a day when this and that, like it's like they start each sentence correctly, and then it just kind of goes to like, bleh. It just kind of, and as a scientist and somebody who's a public health, public science communicator, I'm constantly under the scrutiny of like, wait, what exactly is the protocol? What exactly justifies the protocol? Okay, delay caffeine 90 minutes after waking. If you crash in the afternoon, well, what's the randomized controlled trial? I'll be the first to tell you there isn't one. I'll also tell you the mechanisms that support my statement. Now, if you talk to Dr. Lane Norton, someone who I respect tremendously, he's been on my podcast twice, I have tremendous respect for him. He'll tell you, unless it's a randomized controlled trial, that doesn't meet his threshold. And I'll tell you, well, I don't eat seed oils. I avoid them most of the time because I like olive oil and butter. I'm not afraid of them. But, it's not based on a randomized controlled trial. I just feel better when I don't. So I'll tell you my reasons for believing strongly why I suggest A or B or what I do. Does it meet the same standard that Lane requires? No. But I'll tell you exactly what I'm grounding my statements on. And what I want as a scientist, what I want as a citizen is for the candidates, presidential candidates, all candidates, just tell me what you believe. Tell me the rationale. The rationale could be, listen, they're telling me to say this, but just tell me what you believe and why. And when you do that for somebody, certainly when that's done for me, I just feel an immense relief and an immense trust that the person actually understands their own process. They're letting us look at the underlying mechanics. And I also want to know what they envision for the future. Right now, I'm hearing very little about that. I'm hearing a lot of aspirational things on the one side that are very vague, and I'm hearing a lot of kind of like dogmatic language on the other side, also pretty vague. And so I want to know, I want a list, like send me the 1-page PDF. I want to know, like, what are your protocols for making this a better country?
I think it's
so that's my threshold. And I do get worked up about this, but not enough to run for office.
I found this really interesting study that's been done recently. Stories don't care about your statistics. In controlled experiments, researchers documented a pronounced story statistic gap in memory. The average impact of statistics on beliefs fades by 73% over the course of a day. The impact of a story fades by only 32%. Wow. So that's 73% Average impact of statistics on beliefs, 32% on a story. So in short, people's beliefs are more durably impacted by stories than statistics. Huge implications for how voters' beliefs can be more easily swayed during the upcoming elections.
Yeah, part of the reason I love you, I really mean that. Like you have an unbelievable ability to find studies that are relevant that I would never find. Here's why I believe stories are more impactful than just citing statistics. The reason is that the brain organizes memories of all kinds in beginning, middle, and end. And a graph has a structure, but it doesn't really have a beginning, middle, and end. Now, it can be a time course plot. It can be a time course plot. There are all sorts of caveats to this, right? And the scientist in me always has to mention all the caveats. But from the time that we are little children, we organize things in terms of beginning, middle, and end. The best example of this is the ABCs. When you learn the ABCs, you don't do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. For a moment there, I was worried I wouldn't remember.
Yep.
But I'm so far so good. And I've been drinking my new tonic.
So flying.
But how do children learn the ABC?
A, B, C, D, E,
right.
F.
So the brain is learning the inflections. It's learning what's prosody, right? The inflections, the lilting fall of voice. And we know that this is one of the ways that we organize information. My friends who are like world-class musicians who sing, I always say like I remember lyrics really well. And I always say, oh, what about that lyric? And they go, oh, like I can't remember. And then they'll start with the first line. And then all of a sudden they remember the whole song.
Sequence.
That's right. That's the way memories are organized. They sort of peel back. Like some people are very good at memorizing lists where acronyms can help us. But in general, we sequence our life on the basis of a beginning, middle, end type structure. So, I think when people, now, the exception to this would be flashbulb memories. Like, for instance, about a month ago, right, one of the presidential candidates, there was an assassination attempt on his life. I think that was the first time since 9/11 that I recall everyone in the country being tuned into the same event online.
Wild.
I mean, there may have been intervening things, but
wild.
There was an earthquake this morning in Los Angeles. Did you feel it?
I was busy preparing and I had my AirPods in.
All right,
and
great.
Everybody else went, ah!
It was a little one, but I grew up in California. This one was kind of it was a ripple, not a rumble. So usually if it's a bigger one, you'll hear it like a train coming through the environment. In any case, not a flashbulb memory, right? Obviously, but you remember what you were doing. But, a few weeks ago, or about a month ago during that assassination attempt, we had a flashbulb memory. I can recall it was a Saturday. I was sitting on the couch,
Yep.
My girlfriend and I were talking, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh my goodness, she's like, no, oh my goodness, and all of a sudden we were on the phone. Right, exactly. So, flashbulb memories are an exception to what we're talking about, and they grab all the context around that.
I remember when my mum picked me up on 9/11 from school, and I remember listening to it in the radio. My memory, I know yours, I really want to get into this later on, about you have a very self-identified, very good memory of life experiences going quite a way back into your youth.
Yeah, for better or worse. Yeah,
I'm for better or worse, I'm the opposite. But I remember that one, light bulb memory, like big, important event.
Yeah.
But the story thing's so interesting, and I think.
Oh, by the way, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but you know that the origin of flashbulb memory is adrenaline. It's adrenaline released from the adrenals and in the locus ceruleus, sort of a quote unquote alertness center, although my neuroscience colleagues are going to be like, there he goes, calling brain structures by the function. But, it releases epinephrine into the brain in kind of a sprinklering fashion. That there's, we know, and there's a beautiful review by James McGaugh, one of the leading researchers in memory about this, that, dating back to medieval times, if they wanted kids to remember something, I'm not making this up, they would, I can say it's an annual review of a neuroscience, starts off by describing they would take kids, they'd give them a tutorial. Typically it was a religious tutorial back then, and then they'd throw them into cold water. So you get a spike in adrenaline and then you remember what you had heard prior. So it's, when you have a spike in adrenaline, the brain, the nervous system knows something's different. It cues the memory system.
So just to think about why that might be adaptive ancestrally, any dump of adrenaline of that kind of size would probably be indicative of such a important strategic learning moment, opportunity. Do not go near that cave that happened to have that bear in it again.
Right.
will make sure that you actually hold. Is that the
right? So
the
much so, yeah, so much so that there's what's called conditioned place aversion. So in fact, if you see a drawing of that cave or you go back to that cave, you start to experience some of the same somatic stuff. What is the same somatic stuff? Well, the nervous system is fairly nuanced, but it's also crude. You're releasing some adrenaline. It's the increase in heart rate, the increase in breathing. It's like, oh, that cave. Now, the issue becomes it's not nuanced enough that such that some people then they see any cave and then they think that could represent danger. So, the adrenaline system is a way to obviously cue alertness very fast, milliseconds fast, but also to change the chemical milieu of the brain so that whatever memories or experiences were being charted in the brain now are locked into your memory. So for instance, let's say we were to walk out of here, we walk out to the car and we're not thinking about something bad that could happen. And all of a sudden, crack, 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 and someone gets shot right in front of us. Whoa, okay. Now, all sorts of things are going to happen. Okay, hopefully no one's hurt at it. Let's say it's a bad, tragic incident. Now, the adrenaline released into your system grabbed and consolidated the memories of this house, of the lawn, of walking out there. This is why people who experience trauma oftentimes have kind of seemingly odd or unrelated recollections about the things leading up to an event. Okay, so because ultimately, what did you need to learn? Not to avoid streets, not to avoid this street necessarily, but like, what were you doing?
Your brain is trying to grab something.
That's right. What brought you to that location? What things brought you to that incident?
Oh, interesting.
And of course, some people dump these experiences more readily than others. Part of the logic behind a lot of, not all, but a lot of trauma therapies is to literally bring the brain and body back into a state of high intensity and then to re-script the story. Others are designed to bring you back into the story, but keep you calm. So there's sort of two general approaches, just as there are approaches to treating depression that involve, bringing a lot of salience and emotion to the surface, the cathartic approach. These are tested and some work very well, as well as the use of drugs like ketamine, FDA approved drug for dissociating your emotions while in the presence of the
MDMA.
Event. Right. Or MDMA, which just recently, day before yesterday, failed to pass approval by the FDA for the treatment of PTSD.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah, big deal in the community, the psychiatric community. This could be summarized as very impressive clinical trials showing up to 67% even remission of PTSD or significant reduction in PTSD from people that did 2 sessions of MDMA with a qualified therapist in a clinical setting. But the FDA had a number of different stated reasons, including lack of control group. It's very hard to have a control in the sense that people can take no MDMA, methylene dioxymethamphetamine, but then they knew that they were in the control group. Right, it's this whole business of how do you blind people to the drug?
If you've taken MDMA, you know it.
Yeah, and then there were some other issues, sadly, that seemed, at least by my read, not unique to MDMA therapies, but that unfortunately had happened during the course of the trials, which made the results not satisfactory enough for the FDA. So I think that the effort needs to continue.
Do they get another crack at this? Will they get another?
Yeah,
one hopes. Submit again.
Yeah, one hopes. But there are a lot of people out there with PTSD and intractable types of stress disorders that now are tractable with treatments like MDMA, provided you have the right therapeutic support. And that's the issue is, these drugs without the proper therapeutic support can send people down bad trajectories. And so this is the big thing. And you can tell I'm kind of agonizing over this because, we need to, the way these things move forward is we need to be very objective and say, okay, why did the FDA say no? Why? We can kick and scream about it, but that's not going to do any good. Why did they say no? And then address those issues. Like a scientist, you get a paper back, you think it's the greatest paper in the world, you get the reviews, and they have issues with certain things. You go, well, wait, but, and you have to go systematically until those issues are dealt with.
You're going to get the same result.
You're going to get the same result. So we need to be very objective about this. And I look forward to a day when the FDA is satisfied based on the best criteria. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not being political there. I think these drugs can really help people in the right circumstances. But it's been a slog for the community of people trying to get these drugs through.
Trust really is everything when it comes to supplements. A lot of brands may say that they're top quality, but few can actually prove it, which is why I partnered with Momentous. They make the highest quality supplements on the planet. They're literally unparalleled when it comes to rigorous third-party testing. What you read on the label is what is in the product and absolutely nothing else. Dr. Andrew Huberman is actually the scientific advisor for Momentous, so if you've ever wondered what supplements he would create or what he really uses himself, this is the answer. If you've been struggling with sleep quality, their sleep packs are one of my favorite products, which I use every single night before I go to bed. They contain only the most evidence-based ingredients at perfect doses to help you fall asleep more quickly, stay asleep throughout the night, and help you wake up feeling more rested and revitalized in the morning. Best of all, there is a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can buy it completely risk-free, and if you do not like it for any reason, they will give you your money back. Plus, they ship internationally. You can get a 20% discount off everything site-wide by going to the link in the description below or heading to livemomentous.com/modernwisdom and using the code modernwisdom at checkout. That's livemomentous.com/modernwisdom and modernwisdom at checkout. Yeah, one of my friends, her husband has suffered with PTSD, with alcoholism. Oh yeah, get the switching out flavors. Wild citrus.
Well, you know what's weird is I study the visual system. I have an appointment in ophthalmology after all, and I can see great at a distance. I can read small text at a distance, but I'm actually running into trouble seeing things up close recently. I'm like, if I put it here, I'm blind to it.
Well, I told you last time about my LASIK, right? And I can see absolutely everything. Ancestral trauma at 500 yards. I'm like Tim Kennedy.
I'm sorry. I'm not laughing at it. I'm not laughing at Tim Kennedy. Lord knows I'm not laughing at Tim Kennedy. Tim, don't hurt me. I'm a fan. I'm just the fact that you could see trauma at 500 yards is that's a high acuity vision. So, thank goodness. I like Tim. Like
he will come and find you.
Yeah,
I've got a story.
No.
I'll tell you a story that he told me about him and Bryan Callen, and
one's good too.
Good, happy days. So Bryan went over to the UK with them. He was going to go surfing. They were doing some sort of adventure in the UK. And Bryan arrived late, and Tim said, "We're going to go swimming in the morning." He's like, "No, Tim, I just got in. Like my flight, you've been here for a little bit longer." And he said, "No," grabbed him by the arm like that, and said, "No, we're going swimming in the morning." Looked him in the eyes, and Bryan was like, "Oh, Tim, I don't want to. I'm going to be tired. I'm going to be whatever." Anyway, Tim made the threat sufficiently plain that he wasn't joking. So 6 a.m, Bryan hears this little knock on his door.
6 a.m.
Bryan. So Bryan pretends to be asleep. Bryan's an actor. Bryan's been in Hollywood movies, big Hollywood
Comedian
movies.
too, right?
Comedian and actor.
Yeah.
He said he channeled every single ounce of acting ability that he had. So he sort of laid on one side, and he even so give a little snort here and there, and he heard the door open, and then he felt the bed move one side to the other like that. It sort of rocked from left to right. And then Tim's face came down to his ear, and he said, "Bryan, do you know how many terrorists I've stood over when they pretended to be asleep?" And,
next thing you know, he's in the water swimming.
Correct. And sure enough, that, you're talking about the cortisol spike.
Yeah.
That is a reliable way to give. That would be that's the ultimate alarm, the Tim Kennedy alarm. Forget using sleep cycle. Forget everything that I said. Just pay Tim Kennedy to come and pretend that you're a terrorist.
Yeah. It actually raises an interesting and relevant biological point, which is that, if you wake up at 5 a.m. and you glance at your phone, something I don't recommend doing, and you see a troubling text message, you'll be wide awake in a moment. And that's adrenaline, epinephrine. In the brain, we call it epinephrine. In the body, we call it adrenaline for uninteresting reasons. But that structure of neurons, that cluster in the brainstem called the sort of back of the brain area, let's just stay with broad nomenclature. The locus coeruleus has there's a cluster of neurons that do many different things there, but some of them provide these wire-like axonal inputs, as we call them, in a kind of sprinkler fashion to the brain. And when there's something that alerts us that we need, it's triggering to us, if you will, it just it sprinklers the brain. Yeah, it sprinklers the brain with epinephrine, adrenaline, and boom, the brain wakes up. And then in parallel, your adrenals release adrenaline, and within couple hundred milliseconds, you're up. You're able to move, and you're not thinking about fatigue, and adenosine doesn't mean anything. And, and sometimes I think that earlier we were only half joking, Jocko, about Jocko Williamson, the sort of 4:30 a.m. thing and waking up. You can train these systems. Earlier we were talking about entraining the circadian clock to different stimuli to become an early riser or a late shifted person, as it were. All of these neural circuits are subject to kind of conditional plasticity, right? So like the alarm, boom, like you can be wide awake, or in my case, you're like, hit the snooze, right? Nothing's like the sleep that you get during a snooze. It's so good. It's so good. But, you can be conditioned you can condition these locus coeruleus systems, the adrenaline system. In fact, we were talking about it a minute ago in the context of PTSD, in the context of fear, in the context of non-nuanced alertness, but on the basis of a broad stimulus, like, if something terrible happened to you in a garage, we're in this beautiful garage with all these vintage cars around, but if something bad happened to you in a garage, it doesn't have to be that garage. It can just be garages, the smell of metal, different sensory cues get embedded in those memories and then can feed into these alertness systems. And this is why, it's such a challenge to undo, to unpeel a trauma or a chronic anxieties. You have to sort of get to the combination of things that is the combination lock that lets you undo it.
That was one of the most interesting things I learned from Paul Conti. I told him a story. When I was 20, I was in a head-on collision with a snowplow at 60 miles an hour on the main artery motorway of the UK going up to Scotland.
So they were driving the snowplow.
And they sort of listed gently across into our lane, only clipped.
You're driving a little MG or something?
It was a Ford Focus with my business partner in. Yeah. And they only clipped maybe about a foot or so into the car. Mm-hmm. But for him, what we think happened was he was probably looking at something, not looking, like, bink, and what was that? And just kept on going, didn't even notice. For us, all hell broke loose. And I said to Paul, I had a little bit of travel anxiety for a short while after that, and it dissipated. About 6 weeks or so, I was uncomfortable with contraflow traffic. So I didn't like being on that lane. I would always be on the other side of the road in the UK.
Right.
So I would want to be on the outside lane, not the inside lane. And he said, one of the interesting things about the way that trauma can repattern memories, old memories, is that you could have convinced yourself, well, I've never liked driving. I've always been uncomfortable of this. You can forget that there was ever a time before the incident when you felt differently. And this is where I think, first off, our brains aren't always necessarily our best friends. And secondly, what's the story that you're telling yourself? What's the story that your brain is telling yourself about these memories? Paul was adamant. He said, you absolutely could have begun telling yourself, because I love driving. I miss not having a car in the US. I finally did get a car at the start of this year, and I really enjoy being back on the road. It's the time where I get to listen to podcasts and I can't use my phone, and I really like it. And but he said, had it have been a more significant issue, or had you dealt with it in a different way, or you could have convinced yourself, oh no, I've always been a nervous driver. I've never enjoyed driving. And then how sort of infectious and pernicious is that kind of a memory, these individual instances, which I think are why it is so important to connect with those emotions, to look at the things that are driving you. What are your unspoken assumptions about the world?
Man. So I'm just wrapped with attention as you're telling this. So I have this notebook. I like these bound notebooks, and I started writing kind of journal format, but then recently I started just jotting things down. Sometimes it's podcast notes, but the other day I had this thought. It's going to seem very, this is a funny one. You want to hear a funny one?
I do.
So a long time ago, I used to make a joke, but I decided to just script it out. This is only a 3-word entry. It said, my goal in life has been to go from like oi to just peace. So I have oi. No, I have oi. And then I have oi. And then I have oi. And then I have just like peace. Like that, like basically aside from sleep, like these are the 3 states that I can be in. Right.
Okay.
So in any case.
Idiot, aggression, chill.
Yeah. Yeah. So assumptions about the world. So the one that I woke up the other day, I spent a lot of time the other day explaining to a friend that because they were going through something that was really unfair, and we were I'll get back to this, but we were parsing the difference between mistakes misunderstandings and betrayals, and how some people respond to mistakes and misunderstandings as if they were betrayals. And some people mix these up, so that was an interesting one, but to me anyway. But the thing that you said, assumptions about the world, I know it's in here someplace. I wrote it down and it felt so true. This is it. This was the other morning I woke up and I was like, I don't feel right. Like, I don't feel right. Like, I've got all this stuff to do. Like, something just, and I was like, I can't remember a time. This is why what you just said cued me. I can't remember a time when I woke up just feeling like there was nothing bearing down on me that day, ever. But now, based on what you're telling me, perhaps there was a time and I just don't remember. Mm-hmm. But then I was lying in bed, as I do, keeping my eyes closed. Rick Rubin taught me this trick. Not in the same bed, but he taught me this trick. He said, if you wake up and you're having a dream right before you wake up and you want to remember the dream, or you want to stay in a mental state, keep your eyes closed and stay completely still. However, if you're having a nightmare or you don't like the way that you feel, move your body.
There's something about the movement that dispels it.
Absolutely. And if you think about rapid eye movement sleep, which is the most dream-rich sleep, your body is paralyzed and the mind is active. So I've started doing this and it's made it very easy for me to remember my dreams. So Rick, who's not formally trained in science, but is Rick, gave me that tool and it works exceptionally well in my experience. But I woke up and I said, maybe the illusion is the pain. Maybe the illusion is the pain. Maybe the mental anguish I feel, maybe the challenge of life, like maybe that's the illusion, right? Because we hear so much about how, the pleasures are the illusions. Now dopamine's a real thing and chasing dopamine is a real thing. At its extremes, it can be addiction. At its less extremes, it can be compulsions, and it can also be a joyful life. But I was thinking to myself, maybe pain is the illusion, right? Maybe the idea that there's all this like challenge and maybe that's the thing that we're supposed to remove. And then I thought back to something that a friend who's a very, very talented trauma therapist, his name is Ryan Suave. He's out in Florida. Runs a trauma treatment center out there, once told me, he said, in some of the Buddhist traditions, they talk about that your work in this life is in part, not completely, is to burn down, I think they call them, I'm going to get the pronunciation wrong, but someone will tell us in the comments, the samsaras, like burning down to the roots, like the weeds of life, like your misperceptions about what things are. And I started thinking about this, especially after Martha Beck was on my podcast, who I really love. She said, you're not here to suffer. And I thought, I'm not? And she was like, you're not here to suffer. I've endured a lot of suffering in my life, more than some, less than others. But I think we all endure a lot of suffering, largely as a consequence of what happens between our ears. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, some of us also because of things that actually happen to our bodies, but we're self-induced or otherwise. But, maybe we're not here to suffer. Maybe a lot of the suffering that we experience is this illusion that we create. And so I wrote it down. Maybe the illusion is the pain. And so maybe we need to challenge this. Like maybe it's okay to be joyful, a little more joyful. Dude,
I have so much.
Is that I mean,
it's great. And I have
wishy-washy?
No, not at all. I have so much to tell you. So overthinking creates more problems than it solves.
Definitely.
And
unless you're solving a really hard problem.
Correct. But on average,
yes,
as everything is.
Yeah.
Joe Hudson, do you know who he is?
I don't.
Art of Accomplishment. Phenomenal guy. Really, really interesting dude. Came on the pod. And he has this very unique definition of efficiency. And he thinks of joy as efficiency. So efficiency is how much you get out for how much you put in, right? What is the return? What is the output that you get for the input that you've had to expend? And if you do something which is joyful, you have to expend less. And on the other side, you get out more. It's like, what a lovely redefinition. So joy, enjoyment, for him is the ultimate version of efficiency. That if you're using your passion, if you're doing something which you find enlivening, you are by definition helping to make your system more efficient. So his question while we were doing this podcast, it was a virtual one, and he said, this is one of his favorite little cues that he asks, he says, what would this be like if it was 10% more enjoyable?
I love that. What's this guy's name again?
Joe Hudson.
And I wrote down joy is efficiency. Joe Hudson.
Joe Hudson, yeah.
And not that it matters, but what's his training? Is he a psychologist?
It's very lengthy.
Okay.
So What would this be like if it was 10% more enjoyable? And that is a cue. 10% is achievable. And what he said there, so I'll notice when I said that just now, I sort of shifted in my seat a little bit. My back, so my t-shirt was a little creased under my lower back, so I'd move that, and maybe I'll get a little drink. I'll look after myself. I'll look after my body. Or maybe I'll allow the peripheries of my gaze to just sort of open out a bit. Or maybe I'll take a little slightly deeper breath and I'll oxygenate a little bit more.
Yeah, like we get, like, I'm having fun right now, but we can have 10% more fun.
Just 10% more enjoyable.
Like,
what would that be like?
Loosen the bolts, 10%.
So that's one thing. The other thing, an insight that I've been thinking about a lot recently, things are not what they are. Things are what we think they are. For instance, doing a hard workout gives you a signature feeling. You're laid on the floor, panting, heart rate at 180, sweating from everywhere with the taste of metal in your mouth. This is oddly enjoyable. But if this exact same sensation was to spontaneously occur in your car while you were sat in traffic, you'd call the ambulance for fear that you're having a heart attack. Framing is everything. This is a quote from Rory Sutherland. Do you know who that is? One of the greatest living advertisers on the planet, vice chairman of Ogilvy Advertising. He's the only man I've ever heard swear in a TED Talk. And this is a direct quote from his TED Talk. He says, "Sometimes you just want to stand in the corner and stare out of the window. The problem is, when you're not smoking and staring out of the window, you're an antisocial, friendless idiot. If you stand and stare out of the window with a cigarette, you're a fucking philosopher. The power of reframing things cannot be overstated. It's significantly easier to find a way to reframe your experiences as enjoyable while you improve them, rather than waiting for them to be done before you give yourself license to be happy." And that's like alchemy. It's kind of alchemy.
I like that. I'm both taking notes and listening very carefully. Yeah, I think people exist on a continuum of bias toward more joy or bias toward more pain. And I agree that we have a lot of cognitive control over the middle range, right? Because of course there are experiences that are awful, traumatic, unequivocally, excellent or terrible. There's no question about that.
We'll get back to talking to Andrew in 1 minute, but first I need to tell you about Marek Health. You might have heard me say that I took my testosterone level from 495 to 1,006 last year, and that was done without TRT and under the guidance of Marek Health. Marek Health have the best, most sophisticated and comprehensive service of anyone. In fact, I've loved this process so much that I reached out to the owner so that I could partner with them on the show. Dr. Andrew Huberman is always talking about how important it is to keep on top of your blood work. And if you've always thought, oh yeah, I really should work out what's going on inside of my body, Marek Health is the place to go. With Marek's complete package, you're able to get extensive lab work on over 100 carefully selected biomarkers, giving you insights into your hormone profile, your cardiovascular health, organ function, and much more. Stop guessing when it comes to your health and get the exact same panel and medical oversight I got, plus a 10% discount by clicking the link in the description below or heading to marekhealth.com/modernwisdom and using the code modernwisdom at checkout. That's MAREK health.com/modernwisdom and modern wisdom at checkout.
I turn 49 next month. I'm trying to think about like what I've learned, where I'm headed. And I have, unfortunately at times, but also fortunately, my memory is very good. My memory is very, very
good. How
good?
good? What's good?
I mean, I can close my eyes and hear conversations that I had with people in with a fair degree of accuracy, I believe.
How far does that go back?
Oh, I can remember walks I took with my dad when I was 5 or 6 years old. I can remember the layout of my room and to like fine detail when I was a kid. Faces, I have a very strong recollection of faces and facial recognition. I don't track time well. As a professor, we get some leeway, but I perpetually run late. I don't track time. And until recently, I didn't really have a sense of death. I mean, I knew it existed. I've had people close to me die. All 3 of my academic advisors died, suicide, cancer. Yeah, the joke in my field is you don't want me to work for you.
I was going to say,
I'm the common denominator.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, for a guy that didn't grow up in the inner city or military, I've had, quite a few friends die, drug overdoses, suicides, and it's kind of hard to know if it's on average more or less. I was a teen in the, in the late 80s, early 90s, and there weren't a lot of people doing therapy. There were no psychological meds for the treatment of different conditions. Maybe that's it. Who knows? In any case, if I spend any amount of time thinking about anything of the past, I can easily drift into it. In fact, until very recently, very, very recently, much of my cognition each day was a battle between trying to anchor in the present and thinking forward, and being pulled into memories of the past, kind of orienting toward the past.
Such a rich opportunity to ruminate.
Yeah. Or seeing in, even music from the past acting as a cue to the past. Something happened in like the last 8-9 months where I feel hyper focused on the present. Very, very little focus on the past. Very little. I have exquisite memory of the past, but very little. In fact, one of my journal entries was, I was trying to think of, and this is somewhat embarrassing because it's not the way I would have scripted it, but I was thinking about from the time as early back as I could remember, the different animals that I felt like I sort of related to or embodied it. When I was a kid, I had the same voice I have now. They called me Froggy, because I was like the kid from the Little Rascals, is a show that most people now don't know. He'd like the kid talk like this. And I had, my Adam's apple was out when I was a little kid. I had hair on my Adam's apple. It's like I'm a heterozygote for a certain genetic mutation. I overproduce androgen from my adrenals. If you have 2 copies, it can make you infertile. Fortunately, I don't. I have 1 copy, and it doesn't result in any other like bodily differences or anything like that. I'm very fortunate in that way, and I'm aware I can reproduce. Let's just leave it at that. Okay. So, but then, there were different animals at different stages of my life as I grew and matured and experienced different things. I was like, at one stage of my life, I felt very oriented towards the mustelids, and then at other times towards like a certain species of cat. And like, I identified with them in a number of ways. And then recently I was on this long run. I do these long Sunday rucks and runs. And I was thinking to myself, like, where am I at right now? And all of a sudden I just went, oh shit, this is about the least exciting animal I could think about. And I realized, like, right now at this stage of my life, I don't know how long this will last. And this is very personal, but whatever. F it. Like lately I'm just kind of opening up on podcasts, my own and others. I realized, and no, it has nothing to do with butterflies. I realize I'm in total caterpillar mode, and it has nothing to do with becoming a butterfly. Not that that would be a bad thing. It's that I'm able to orient towards the tasks of the day divided into 3 parts. I basically have vision about this far in front of me, despite what I said a few minutes ago. I can think about what I need to do. I know where I'm headed. I can move forward, not backward, but I can't seem to bring my thinking any further than that. And it's such a new place for me. I have to consciously try and think into the past. I'm like, that was yesterday. It was yesterday. I can't do it. Now, I'm not in denial. I can do it if I need to. But for me, this is a very functional way to be at this point in my life because of the enormous number of tasks in my life. Fortunately, the enormous number of people that I love and that I want to spend time with and make time for. But somehow I have just so I drew it out. I was like, freaking caterpillar, and we'll see what happens. And and where this goes. But, the other animals in here, there was a rhinoceros phase. That was interesting. Moving very slowly, but with a lot of force, on anything that was in my way at one stage. There's been times when I've felt like a raptor, where I was just kind of like placed and really observant. I spent an entire year speaking very little, believe it or not. People in my life will be like, what year was that? I didn't talk to you that year. Exactly. You didn't talk to me that year, and I didn't talk to you. If you're wondering where I was. So right now, by sort of like identifying with this kind of mode of caterpillar vision and movement, everything is in small increments. I even feel it in the way that I talk and the way I parse ideas. I'm writing the bonus chapters for my book, which comes out in April of next year. Like everything is line by line. Everything is iterative. And I am not oriented toward the past. It's there if I need it. It's like a book on a shelf I can go grab and look things up. But until now, have existed very much in like sort of thinking about the losses of past, the wins of past, identifying with that. And I don't know what caused this. I can't point to one single psychedelic journey. Not that I've been doing a lot of psychedelics. We could talk about that. I was involved in some psychedelic trials, but I don't think that's it. I think it's that I've matured. I think the brain matures your whole life. I don't think we have childhood and adulthood and then death. I think we have a developmental arc that starts when we're born, probably before we're born. I mean, after all, we were embryos with, who knows if we have consciousness, but we were alive, right? Born, and then we have a developmental arc. And the great psychologist Erickson talked about at every stage of life from birth until death, until one's 80s and 90s, you're working out some core conflicts of agency versus, autonomy versus having to do what other people have you do. And I forget the stages off the top of my head because it's not my area of expertise. But look at my dad, who's turning 81 in November, who fortunately, God willing, is going to live another 20, 25 years with immense vigor. And he's still cognitively super sharp. And he's working out whatever it is you work out when you're 80.
Yep.
I'm working out whatever it is now, but right now it's like caterpillar vision. And as a consequence, the past, while important and informs a lot of who I am and what I do, it's not in my consciousness at all. And I must say, it's a great place to be, because throughout my 30s, I felt very stricken, very pulled in different directions based on past, present, and efforts toward the future. So I say this in part because if you're struggling, kind of feeling stuck in your life story, there's great advantage to just letting some time pass.
Getting older.
Just getting older is the best. As long as you train with weights 3 times a week, run 3 times a week, long, medium, and short runs, and you take a cold shower and you eat mostly unprocessed and minimally processed foods, and you try and get sleep, and you limit your alcohol, and you deal with any addictions you might have, and you work on your traumas, you're going to have a great freaking life. You're going to be healthier than 90% of people in the world, right? Are you going to take gold at the Olympics? Are you going to be Cole Hawker and take the gold from 5th position in the final 100 meters of the 1500? No, unless you're Cole Hawker, but you can still have an amazing life. And so I think there've been so many years where I've just been God, this just feels like a battle. This just feels like, and I can't complain. I've been given so many opportunities and gifts and trying to make the best of those and share. But I just feel listen, if it's a freaking caterpillar, it's a caterpillar. And then I got back from that run and I was thinking to myself, oh no, now I got to think about the butterfly thing. And this is turning out pretty soft. And then I thought, hey, well, that's pretty cool. So I started researching caterpillars, because this is me. So I started reading about caterpillars. They are amazing. Some of them have adapted different poisons so that the birds that eat them don't die, but literally survive and transmit the discomfort by feeding their young. And then the young are ugh. And they actually know they form a permanent memory not to eat those caterpillars. So I now look at caterpillars completely differently.
Wow, that's cool.
I spent a lot of time drawing caterpillars. I haven't yet watched a documentary about caterpillars.
I'm sure you'll find one.
But anyway, I'll avoid going down this hole any more than I already have. But I think there's great wisdom in trying to think about different animals and how we orient toward them as people. I certainly look at other people and think, what dog are they, et cetera. And in part because I think that other animals, in the absence of their kind of self-awareness, they're displaying to us how different the biases of different components of the nervous system. So dogs that move their tails a lot and have a lot of spontaneous movement, right? The pit bull breeds versus a bulldog, which doesn't move unless it has to. They have different spontaneous temperaments. And then you look at people. I have a colleague, he's Hungarian. He has a lab in Switzerland, and the guy is all staccato movements, and he's this thin and has 5% body fat naturally, right? And then I have other colleagues who more resemble melted candles. And they don't move so much. And they need to exercise more, because I love them, and you don't see many overweight 80-year-olds. So it'd be nice to have you around longer. So 3 times a week, resistance training and cardio.
Thinking about the last few months for you, probably one of the most difficult periods that you've gone through.
I will say, not to undercut where I think we're going, definitely a challenging time, based on what I perceive as a lot of misunderstanding. But fortunately or unfortunately for me, I've been through a lot of hard times, more than some, less than others. But hey, it's all in reference to our own nervous system. And, but definitely hard, but not the hardest time. Certainly not the hardest time. The hardest time was probably years earlier when I had so much less agency, and my community wasn't as established. But definitely not a joyful time. Yeah.
Talk to me about what you learned about yourself and your own psychology and the motivations and sort of dynamics of public scrutiny and pressure like that.
Yeah. So if I may, I'll lathe into this from a bunch of perspectives. And this is usually the point in a discussion like this where like audiences are like, oh, this is where he prepares the diplomatic talk. Like, look, I've done a number of sessions talking about this kind of stuff publicly and privately since then. So like, I'm just showing up to this, how it feels and my read with the understanding that, language is sometimes deficient at like conveying what's really going on, but I'll do my best. So I learned a couple things at a kind of basic factual level. I learned that while there are wonderful aspects to media, there are also a lot of lies in the media. I actually didn't know that or believe that before. You hear about it, but I didn't really understand that stories, literally, fiction can be woven from lack of context or from outright lies. And that for me was an eye-opener. It was like, whoa, like, no, that's not true. That actually didn't happen that way. Or, well, yeah, but you left off the second half of that sentence, which would put it all in context and make this scene completely different. I mean, for a scientist, it was extremely jarring because it was like, I could see what they were doing, but if you tried to do that in a scientific paper or in a talk, you wouldn't be giving that scientific paper or talk. You wouldn't make it 10 feet into the business because that's called cherry picking. It's data selection. It's not what we do. Doesn't mean people don't have biases of conclusion, biases of interpretation, but you reveal those biases. Again, as we talked about earlier, you reveal the origins of your thinking and decisions. You state your motivations. So it woke me up to that. And that was a bit of a, oh man, like really? Like that sucks. Like I wanted to believe that all media was wholesome in its intentions. I also learned that if you have this is hard to say with, I say this with humility, but if your face and name clicks, then you're a target.
What's that mean?
It just means that if the bigger your platform, the more attention your name or face draws, and therefore your name and face is leveraged for clicks. People are making money off of you. It's a profit-driven business. Okay. I also learned that many people are very reasonable and they can see through BS. They can see the like tawdry efforts or the attempt to spin a narrative that just isn't right, isn't true. And what I'm saying there is, whereas I definitely had to face stuff where I felt I was being badly misconstrued or misunderstood, our audience, the podcast audience, and people outside that audience reached out in droves. And supporters at all levels reached out in droves to say, listen, we see what this is. Like, we love what you're doing. We get it. Not a problem, and that was great. It also brought forward my friends and people in the community, both podcasters and academics, family and friends. Basically the essence of it was when my dad and I, who in the past we've had some challenges in our relationship, but now are really good, when he called me and said, they tried to pit us against each other. And I'm like, yeah. And he was like, I can't believe it. He at 80, he couldn't believe it. And he's a very smart guy. Okay. He's a theoretical physicist by training. He's a first generation immigrant. He's not here on accident. He had to work his ass off to get here. And he worked very, very hard to provide for us as kids. So he was like, I can't believe that they would do that. I was like, well, this is apparently what they do. And, and he said, I'll never forget what he said. He said, well, he's very logical. He's a physicist after all. He said, well, one trial learning.
One what?
One trial learning, meaning we're not going to make that mistake again. Right. So that was the sort of the media side of it. And then I also want to acknowledge that there are people in media and there are both journalists and news platforms that I think really are well-intentioned. It also provided this amazing contrast for me. And then I'll get into the more personal aspect, I promise. But it made me realize why podcasting and podcasters like you and Joe and Lex and Whitney and David Senra and Tim Ferriss and Rich Roll and on are so amazing. Rick Rubin. It's real. Like, we're not pretending to be somebody else. We're not doing this to get clicks. Sure, you want the success of your platform, but you're being you. I'm being me. Lex is being Lex. Joe is being Joe. And that's why it works. And it's been so interesting to compare that and contrast that to traditional media, which has its merits, certainly, but for which like it's become this kind of centaur of a thing where you're not sure what the motivations are. And like, why would they go after you? You said this in a clip, like, why would they go after you? Well, you generate clicks, but they're going after you because you actually have 2, 3, 4, 5, 10x their reach. Why? Because people know when something's real, if somebody's being genuine, even if they disagree with that person. And we like realness. We like authenticity. We love that as humans. We want that. It's the artistic expression. And it made me realize that like the obvious, which is that we're in the golden age of podcasting right now. And never before in my life have I sort of been in the golden age of something. I, came up early. I want to be involved in skateboarding. Friends made it as professional skateboarders. I didn't. Okay. I wasn't talented enough. Fine. Got into neuroscience, caught the wave in neuroscience, meaning at a time when you could, I always funded my lab with grants. I even still have some grant money, and even though I still teaching again next spring, I've definitely shrunk my lab down. The media said, oh, he doesn't have a lab. Yeah, I shrunk my lab down. Like,
what's that mean?
It just means I got my students in postdocs jobs. We published 2 papers, including a clinical trial in 2023, but I've shrunk my lab down. Like, so I teach and I'm still tenured at Stanford.
Your lab's still going.
Well, I have grant funds in a new department where we're doing some human clinical trials. Okay. But I no longer run experiments on animals. That was a very personal choice for me. And also when you have students in postdocs, you need to be able to give them a certain amount of time in order to nourish their development. And then all of them, every one of my students and postdocs has gone on to jobs or positions they wanted. So I took care of my academic children. I think they would say that. If they don't, I'll hear from them, but they're doing phenomenally well and I'm very proud of them. They deserve the credit. So it made me realize that, okay, I'm still a neuroscientist. I still read papers. I'm still on editorial boards. And yet right now we're in the golden age of podcasting, this new form of media of people being themselves. It's not like radio. It's like radio, but different. It's not like television. It's like television, but different. In fact, this arc might be of interest to you. I watched this documentary about game shows recently, hosted by Alex Trebek. The documentary, frankly, is far too long, but it goes like this. During the World Series, when DiMaggio was making a effort towards the home run record, was the first commercial, okay, to sell a product. And it was designed to grab the housewives and people that purchase things for the home, okay, back then. Then came eventually game shows. And game shows were just an excuse to sell products. But they eventually found that the human narrative in the game shows, the Price is Right host kissing the contestants, something that would never happen nowadays, okay, things have changed, matured. Eventually it was the human story. Then it became reality TV shows, right? And then now I see social media as the reality TV show that we're all casting ourselves in on a daily basis. And then podcasts are sort of the umbrella around and within social media, right? I mean, I think Elon's sitting down with Trump. Today. Right, exactly.
We didn't mention that just to really track back, just in case you thought that things were going to calm down. Trump's back on Twitter.
Right. He did. I know they released his account. Has he tweeted anything?
Yep, today for the first time since his mugshot.
What did he tweet?
A couple of videos, one mocking Kamala, one bigging himself up, and 2 announcements saying, I'm going live at 8 p.m. tonight with Elon on X.
Okay. But I wonder if they'll correct the Rogan narrative, because over the weekend, there was this narrative that Rogan had endorsed
and then I think
RFK, and it turned out not to be true.
No, he just said that he liked him, which he said 1,000,000 times before.
I see.
And then Trump socialed, I don't know what you call it, posted on Truth Social. I wonder how much Joe Rogan's going to get booed the next time that he goes to the UFC. That may be fact check false. I'm pretty sure that that's that. But I mean, that's a tone deaf.
Rogan is the hero of the UFC.
Yeah, it's Dana White. It's like small Dana White and big Dana White.
Happy birthday, Joe. His birthday was over the weekend.
Yeah.
So I guess the point is this, that the fans, the listeners of a podcast are part of the podcast in a way that no medium has existed before because they can comment and give feedback in a way that has not been available before. Now that's the media side. So it gave me tremendous appreciation for all of that.
The personal side. How do you personally deal with a furor like the one that you went? And also I'm particularly interested in the lessons that you've learned longer term, but what does it feel like to wake up that day? You know, you understand the neurochemicals, you understand the hormonal response, but you've got this just flood of phenomena going through you. Yeah.
So, I think one of the hardest things is being misunderstood, and then understanding, you know, the motivations of the media or the motivations of the people that gave stories to the media, the blatant lies. Although there was a portion of what was said that was absolutely true. And that's the part that I was overly doting on my bulldog. That is absolutely true. That's absolutely true. But, well, what I decided to do is what I've done at numerous times in my life when things felt potentially overwhelming, which was to get a committee of people around me that I really trust and rely on their optics when I couldn't rely on my own. So that meant my podcast producer, Rob Moore. That meant other people, including my family, were amazing. People from my high school, you know, it was interesting because they interviewed many people from my high school, but discarded with those narratives because they were positive. They interviewed many former girlfriends of mine who I was in touch with regularly and still am, who were very positive, and they discarded with those narratives. And you're not looking for yes people, but you're looking for people that can really help steer you through something and help you see where, hey, like maybe you need to pay attention to this aspect of your life a bit more, or that a little bit more. But you know what? No, there's a thick black line here, and that's simply false. Lex Friedman literally showed up in my home. Showed up. I just looked up. There's Lex, jacket and tie. Hey, what's up, brother? He's there. So my home during that week and the weeks following consisted of many people coming to stay. I recall very clearly one day walking out into the yard, I had taken a little nap, and must have been 15 or 20 people there, including my good friend Tim Armstrong, other people there supporting me, just being there, right? We also continued to work in that time. We released solo episodes, we released posts, we released podcasts. We were not going to stop working.
How are you able to get yourself into the right mode of mind? Have you not got split brain problem there? Half of you's over here, the other half's trying to be professional.
I learned in that time, but I took some tools from prior experiences to take 5 to 10 minutes, take the first couple of minutes and meditate, concentrate on one's breath, try and get as present as possible. Your mind is always flitting to these other things that are trying to distract it. Realizing every time you can hold on to your present cognition, bringing things present for a millisecond longer, you're doing that much better, ratcheting back, and then getting into action, doing generative work, teaching science and health information, because that's why the people listen to the Huberman Lab podcast. I don't think they listen to it to hear anything about my personal life or attempts to malign my past story. I will also say there were some things that infused a focus and energy into me that I didn't anticipate that were very beautiful. For instance, you know, one of the narratives that was getting spun out there is that my backstory about growing up in the skateboarding thing, getting into fights, that maybe that had been constructed, which is categorically false. Those are true stories, in other words. And Steve Ruge, the guy who was my team manager at Thunder and Spitfire, skateboard companies back then, wrote to me and he said, yeah, you know, I got this outreach from reporters and they kept kind of trying to pull and get me to change my account of you calling me from being locked up and saying, hey, Steve, like I'm in this place, and me saying, you're the most normal person I know. And, you know, that whole thing. And he's like, and I don't understand why they're doing that. And I was like, I don't know either. And he's like, well, I told them the truth. I told them exactly what happened. You called me. I remember where I was at the deluxe office. Okay, fine. And then he goes, and I told them that I had put you on Thunder and Spitfire. And I was like, do you realize what you just did for me? From the time I was 14 years old, I was still uncertain whether or not you had put me on the team. And I was too embarrassed to ask. And he's like, of course you were on the team. And I was like, oh man, I waited my whole life to hear that. 30 years plus.
Nice silver lining for
so
you
there
then.
it was like, you know, these things that had kind of vexed me for years. Like, was I really part of that or was I not part of that team? Like, so what ended up happening is people from my past showed up, not just my family. Jim Thiebaud from the world of skateboarding, Steve Ruge, people from my past, people from my present. And then I just got outreach from men and women in droves. Some very high profile people, very, very high profile people, some lesser profile, some no profile, reaching out by email, by phone, by text, showing up at my home and encouraging me to continue on the mission. And at that point, I was buoyed by the fact that I'm like, okay, people they can see the truth. They understand context being warped. They understand lies versus truth. And they understand that a single-sided story is never, ever, ever the right way to resolve issues. And so it was amazing to see. And then what happened was we started growing. And I was like, oh my goodness, you hear about this. You're going to grow from this. I always thought that just meant psychologically and internally, but then it was like, we grew. Then the next thing I know, I'm on Jimmy Fallon. Okay. Some people might have thought that came about before. Next thing you know, we're a Jeopardy question. Like all of a sudden, like things started growing. And then I started realizing, let's just get back to work.
Was that the fastest period in the show's growth history?
I don't know because I don't track the numbers that closely.
Close.
I decided early on to remove my dopamine circuits from the numbers. I do my own Instagram. I do my own Twitter. And I don't have someone manage my comments. I manage all of that myself. So yes, if I say thank you in the DMs, that's me. But it was definitely among the sharpest inflections I've ever experienced.
I think Joe said something similar about the CNN horse-paced dewormer scenario that although, it might feel back, so he had a sort of a 1-2 punch. He had his infamous N-word video and the CNN thing within 6 months of each other. But he said the quickest period that they've ever had was the CNN thing. So if you were, one of the sensations I imagine you must have is indignation. Well, this isn't true, and I want to correct the record. As you said, one of the worst things is being misunderstood. Was it a strategic decision to not issue a statement? Here we go. Here's the 4-hour-long breakdown. You've got the tools, you've got the platform, you've got the followers. Why not get it out there?
Yeah. Well, I certainly was tempted at times, but the consultation I got and what I eventually arrived at was that no matter what I would say, that, well, first of all, there were elements to some of that needed to remain private to protect other people. So in that sense, there were a few things I had to take on the chin to protect other people's lives. Not their actual lives, but their well-being. The other piece was that it was made very clear to me, and I wholeheartedly agree that the media will cherry pick statements and kludge together things, they're still doing it, in order to spin a narrative, right? That makes it such that no matter what you say, it won't be understood the way you want it to be understood. And that was extremely frustrating to me. Extremely frustrating to me. In fact, last night, late at night, I had a conversation with a male friend and colleague with whom we had a misunderstanding. This gets to something I mentioned a little bit earlier. Not a betrayal, not a mistake, a misunderstanding. And we actually didn't speak to one another for about a month and a half. And it was very frustrating for me and for them. And then he and I wouldn't even say hashed it out last night. We just brought to the table. I said, listen, I think there was a misunderstanding, not a mistake, not a betrayal. I own my part and I'm sorry. And I've learned, you say you're sorry. That was it. You say you're sorry. And he said the same thing. He goes, I think I overreacted. And I said, I didn't say, no, you didn't or anything, even though I have my feelings about it. And he said, I'm sorry. And I said, we're good. We're good. We had done the work internally, right? Now, unfortunately, when things are done at scale, you don't get that opportunity. You don't get like at media scale. And I think also, personally, I mean, obviously, I'm human. There was the need for reflection on the things that past and present that I wish I had done differently, and that you make the change, and you move forward. I'll also say, and people can roll their eyes if they want, or they can come up with any theories they want, but prayer was extremely grounding for me in that time. Just to not meditation, not seeking approval, validation, and support of others, although, support from others was critical, as was constructive critique. But prayer, to just spend time in prayer, listening to any messages that I needed to hear about what needed changing in me, in my personal life, in my family life, in my work life, in my public facing life. And that was honestly the cornerstone. That was the center of it all. That was the piece that allowed me to go, okay, you know what? This sucks. There's silver linings. There's misunderstanding, outright lies, lack of and you know what? I see all that. I see the changes that need to be made. I see where I also draw a thick black line and say, no, that's not that. And we're not going to pretend it is. And prayer was the thing that helped me calibrate my compass 10 times a day. And it wasn't just praying like, oh, please make this stop or anything like that. You know, please. It was more, help me see with clarity. This is the way I would do it. And again, people can decide what they want. I'm not telling anyone what to believe. It was like, you know, literally on my knees, God, please help me see and feel and think with the kind of clarity that's going to allow me to make the best decisions now and going forward. Let me get through this morning, making the best possible decisions given what's happening. I'm turning over all control and agency over the things I can't control to you. And I'm going to put every ounce of effort I can into trying to continue teaching people about science and health and becoming a better person as I go. And that's still my prayer, among other things. Before I go to sleep at night, I'm on my knees at the side of the bed prayer kind of guy since the new year, since just before the new year. Before that, it was kind of in my head, a little bit kind of here or there. And before every podcast, I just went in the bathroom now and prayed before this. I go there for privacy, not because it's the bathroom, and I know for people thinking like, okay, this is a scientist, or now he's kind of claiming the God thing. I'm not claiming anything. Like for me, this has been the most powerful thing that I've ever experienced, because it's just given me peace and a compass and a rudder forward, even if I have to be at caterpillar levels of you know, horizon view, like this far out in front of me, inching forward. You know, I'm just grateful to God. I'm grateful to God for the chance to keep going forward.
What would be your advice to somebody who's going through an emotionally intense period? It seems to me like if I was to try and deconstruct not to make protocols out of a nightmare scenario, but social cohesion, groups around you, not being on your own too much.
Yeah. And if you know, I'm blessed to have a huge network, but I'll say this. I have that network because I put work into that network. Yeah, some of these people I work with, but you know, Jim Thiebaud didn't show up at my house because I'm a podcaster. He showed up there the same way he did 2 years before when I got slammed to the concrete in life. He showed up when I was 14 and I was a depressed kid sitting at the Embarcadero with a busted foot because I couldn't skateboard, and he just sat with me and gave me a book to read and encouraged me to write. You know, I took what Jim did for me and did it for other people. So I like to think perhaps it was God kind of returning the energy, returning the favor. You know, you build your support system in good times. And when they're down, you support them. And you don't do it because you might hit bad times. You will hit bad times. And that's one reason to do it. You just do it. And so there's that. So if you're up, build your support network. Doesn't have to be huge, but make it strong. Make it strong by doing the right thing, setting examples. And, you know, if it's medium, fine. If it's huge, fine. I definitely use tools, right? The physiological side works to limit stress, get sleep. I didn't rely on pharmacology to get sleep. I know some people need to. I just didn't want to go that route. Once, months earlier, I took it was prescribed to me. I took a half Xanax to try and sleep, and the sleep I got felt like crap. I woke up, I was like, I'm not doing that again. I use breathing tools. I use NSDR. I use some supplementation to sleep. But sleep is key. You win by sleeping. That was one of our mottos during that time and all times. When we're out on the road doing lives, it's like we're going from one city to the next, and we're podcasting and we're doing AMAs and we're busy and we're talking all day and go. Like we're sleeping and we don't drink and we're serious. We're like professional athletes, right? So there's that.
Training, hot, cold?
Definitely did some hot, cold. In really stressful times, I'll pare back on training a bit. I train as preparation. So for me, lifting 3 times a week, I love training. Yeah, I do my legs, I do my torso, I do my arms and calves and neck. Okay, sure. I do my long run, I do my medium run, I do my sprint day, I do the cold and heat. But I do that not as a means, I do that in part as a means to an end, so that when it's time to sprint for the airplane, when it's time to take a week and just lean all your physical and mental energy into a crisis, you can do that. And then I go back to training.
That would have been, I think I would have struggled. I think I would have struggled to regulate without training each day.
Listen, taking a walk, getting a good shower, getting your hair cut, these things make a difference. The other thing is I learned to be able to call on people, to pick up the phone, and say, hey, listen, like I'm spinning here. I can't make sense of this strategy or that strategy. What do you think? And then writing down what that person said, taking a few things, and then just going inward, right? There is this tendency, especially with text, to constantly be, increasing the size of your committee. I'll say this was interesting. Some people came to me immediately and said, you should do blank. And I was like, really? And they're like, absolutely, do blank. And then I didn't do blank. And then a week later, they're like, oh, you absolutely did the right thing. You should do exactly the opposite of blank. And then I realized, I was like, oh goodness, not that I'm never going to listen to advice from that person again, but they were just saying stuff. So you need to be a selective filter, and it can be very hard. And I would say anyone going through a crisis of any kind, you need a committee, however big or small. And if you don't have people, you need people in books, you need people in podcasts. And, I'm not a recruiter, but you might give prayer a try, because there's real peace at the center there. And from that peace, you can see the right decision. And from that right decision, you can make the right decision for that circumstance. And there are just too many circumstances to say you should always say this, or you should never say anything, and this kind of thing. What I do know is that, God forbid if they come for you, Chris, or anyone, like, we got you. Like, I don't know what the best advice will be in those circumstances, but we got you. And we got you because you're a truly good person with your heart out there, being you, right? Up until now, you've just been being you, and that's why you're successful. And yeah, I mean, I got calls from, people can guess the names. And there were some names also, I couldn't believe it. I was like, these are people with enormous stature that, like, I thought probably would fall on the opposite end of the spectrum, would be calling me to yell at me. And in fact, we're like, you're doing all the right things. Don't let it get to you. Keep going. Think about X, Y, and Z. And I was like, whoa. So what you will find in hard times like those, God willing, they won't happen to you, is that you'll find your inner resolve. The world will come to you and show you who your real friends are, who your real supporters are. And I wasn't counting off who stuck their neck out for me and who wasn't. It was beautiful to see people who did. And the ones who didn't, I get it. Like, they have their own incentives. They needed to do whatever it is they needed to do.
I think I regretted not messaging you that day. And the reason that I didn't was, it's kind of like when it's somebody's birthday and you think, fuck, does he really need an additional thing? So I texted Rob instead. Like, Rob can be the filter
and
for
he
this.
passed it to me. And thank you. And listen, it's also a felt thing. And you raise a very important point that goes, and I hope people hearing this can understand that the reason to have this discussion is not about me. It's that we all are going to go through these sorts of things at different scales and in different contexts. Is that, it's like when somebody dies, everyone's like, my condolences, so sorry, so sorry. The time to reach out to them is also afterwards. And, again, call me non-scientific. Fine. I have enough science under my belt and to be totally confident in what I'm about to say, which is, like, last night in my prayers, I prayed for somebody who had posted something about losing their mom. I actually didn't know his mom, but I just, like, it came to me. I was like, we all flooded in there, condolences, thoughts, and prayers, but, like, he's probably hurting like crazy right now. And so you pray for that person. Now you say, well, how does that prayer impact them? I don't know, but I believe in that. And you reach out to somebody by text, hey, just checking in. And this is the beauty of what you do. And it's the beauty of what podcasters do in general, which is you're creating things in perpetuity. The AI is going to be trained on these conversations. Your great grandchildren will be able to glean knowledge from things that you've shared. And I think that putting that out into the world in a way that other people can benefit from is nothing short of spectacular. When I was a junior professor, I'd listen to the Tim Ferriss podcast. At that time, it was just that. And like, I remember thinking like this podcast is like my friend in a city where I don't know anyone. Now I'm fortunate to call Tim a friend, right? I could actually call on Tim, but I think that the loneliness and isolation that people feel, especially people that are striving and don't have a big network, can sometimes feel so overwhelming. But I was that guy. I was that kid who didn't have anyone to call, or I was confused about something that was happening and I didn't have the network of people to call. You build that over time, but podcasts and what people being themselves out there in the world, mainly podcasts, it's like, I really care. I hope that if bullet bust or cancer takes me out tomorrow, that some of the things that I've shared, hopefully many of the things that I've shared, could help people now and going forward. That's a real thing. It's not about selling us a advertisement or a supplement. Like that's incidental. It's about the material. So I'm kind of spooling it now, but like within me, I feel immense gratitude. I wouldn't change the experience of the last year for anything. I don't want to experience it, for its own sake, but what it brought me was huge gifts. And yeah, it grew us like crazy, but shit, I mean, if I could have done it a different way, I would, but God served up this meal just the way he did,
Have I ever told you my idea of the lonely chapter? I told you about this?
No, but I feel like I've had a few of those.
Yeah. So I learned this with Alex Hormozy last year. And the lonely chapter describes a time in which you're growing, you're changing as a person, and you're now so different that you can no longer resonate with your old set of friends, but you're not sufficiently developed that you've got the new set of friends that you're going to grow into. And this is the lonely chapter. And the problem with it is that you're always... the desire to sort of regress back to where you were is always going to be there, and you're going to have uncertainty. There's not even the promise of glory or success or triumph when you get through the other side. What am I pushing toward? You're telling me that I'm not going to go out on this night out with my friends, which I've done for the last 5 years or 10 years in the town that I grew up in or went to university in or whatever. You're telling me that I'm not going to do that because I'm going to get up and I'm going to meditate or read. Who even knows if meditation works, right? Like, or you've got all of these questions in your mind, and all of your friends and all of the dynamics and the temptations pull you back toward that. It pulls you back toward the old version of life. So this lonely chapter is a period through which I think everybody needs to squeeze. Anybody that decides to go from a place they are to a place that they want to be is going to have to let go of people who can't go there with them. And this isn't a value judgment about the people that are doing the personal growth thing are better than the people that are already fine as they are and are happy leading a different sort of life. It's that if you know that there is something that you're meant to do, if you know that there's something that you're meant to change, you will have to let certain groups, friends, routines, places, activities, recreations that you do, you're going to have to let those go. And there is this, the Rocky cutscene lasts for 90 seconds in the movie, but it can last for 5 years in your life. And you have no idea whether or not it's even going to work. And that's the bit that always got to me. The bit that always got to me was I didn't even know if there was going to be any glory on the other side. It's like ordering an Uber and never knowing if it's going to arrive or not. You think, well, I'm just stood here doing the thing, but I don't know if it's going to come out on the other side. And I can promise you, anybody that has done anything, moved from any place they were to any place that they want to be, has gone through this lonely chapter. And I think about personal growth like the velocity of a rocket that's taking off. So you've got people moving, and as you start to take off, you can begin to move a little bit more quickly. And as you start to pull away from people, there's a tension between the two of you, because sometimes your behavior, especially if it's positive and you're moving yourself in a more developed direction, can throw into harsh contrast the behavior of the people who maybe aren't doing that. And then you start to sort of become friends with someone that's above you. And then the worst, or one of the really difficult sensations, is if you then do that and you go past somebody who previously you were with, and there's this sort of sense, well, I'm on the journey too, but maybe I'm not moving in the same kind of way that you are. And I came up with this idea of personal growth guilt, like survivor guilt. Somebody comes back from war and they were sat in the back of the Humvee, and the piece of shrapnel that was supposed to kill them and killed all of their buddies hit the engine block, and they come back and they feel like they should still be back there, but they're not. And it's almost the same with the personal growth stuff, that I feel like I'm almost sort of betraying this older version of me, this past version of my life, that I should be there. And there's this scene in The Matrix that Alex talks about where Neo doesn't know if he wants to move forward. He doesn't know if he wants to take the journey that he's called to. And he opens the door and Trinity says, "You've already been down that road, Neo. You know where it takes you, and you know that's not where you want to go back to." And I think about that. I think about that a lot, that lonely chapter. And for me, it lasted for a good amount of time, transitioning from being, a guy in his 20s that does the reality TV thing, does the party boy thing, and then goes, okay, I decide to stop drinking, which 10 years ago was revolutionary, especially as a club promoter. It's now very common to do low and no, but pretty different back then. And all of the incentives were for me to go back to partying. Well, why are you doing that? Oh, you're going to be boring on a night out. I realized that if you need to drink to be around your friends, you don't have friends, you have drinking partners. Yeah. And that if the only way that you can bear to be around your friends is to drink, then you really need to find yourself a better social network. And all of the things, I used to leave the front door of a nightclub and I would sit and I would wedge my phone into the top of the steering wheel. So I have, a party with 1,500 people there. It's my party, my company, right? And I would leave to go watch Alain de Botton School of Life philosophy videos. And it was evident that I just had this odd sort of discordance in my mind. I was being ripped away from where I was to where I am. And I think, the Lonely Chapter is one of the most important insights that has come out of the show over the last 18 months, because it's reassuring to, I think, a huge portion of podcast listeners. Why is it that people resonate and have this parasocial relationship with some bloke that's on the other side of the planet? And I think it's because, well, they're struggling to resonate with any of the blokes or girls that are around them where they live. And, you end up finding solace in this person that speaks to you, mm-hmm. because you struggle to find solace sort of personally. So yeah, the overarching lesson is just keep going. The Lonely Chapter is a feature, not a bug, of personal growth. It's the cost of doing business if you want to develop yourself.
Yeah, I love that. I recall in high school when getting hurt skateboarding, realizing I didn't have a future there, which fortunately was a good thing for me. I mean, it was God again intervening, saying, nope, you're going to get broke off again. This is not going to be your path. Following a high school girlfriend to college, and then realizing after the first year that, drinking and getting in fights was not a good path, and get my life in order. And then studying a lot at a school where at that time people weren't terribly studious, and it was incredibly isolating. I even lived alone, lived with my girlfriend, or I lived alone, and being very isolated. And then in graduate school, felt more social connection. But then as a junior professor, there are boundaries between you and the people you work with, and those are important boundaries. And so not having many male friends, and, fortunately at the time, my romantic partner, who I'm still good friends with, was a great source of family and support, but feeling cut off from friends of other types. And then again, in this more recent iteration of entering the podcast world, but then you find your community. I also think, while I totally agree, you can look to podcasters, to books, also to people who are no longer alive, mentors like the great Oliver Sacks, who I've never met, but I've reached out to people that knew him and that have given me information about him that's given me, have gotten me through many hard times based on his life experience, his biography, his autobiography. This is why I like biography and autobiography so much. You can feel a kinship with people.
That's why David Senra's show is so great.
That's one of the reasons Founders Podcast is so great. I just got to meet Senra himself recently. He's just amazing, amazing podcast. He's amazing. Highly recommend that podcast. Rick Rubin's been a great source of support Tim Armstrong's been an enormous source of support. Jim Thiebaud's been an enormous source of support. Joe Rogan's been an enormous source of support. Lex Friedman's been a big source of support. You've been a great source of support. Whitney Cummings, and on, and people showing up, and people from entirely other industries, investors, people in, I want to, because it's only fair to protect their identities, people in media that are not of the podcasting ilk, for instance, people who I never thought I would meet, explaining the commonalities of their experience, and if you're wondering, okay, well then, those are all these people, but who's going to come for me? Well, I'm going to, and Chris is going to, when you're coming up and you're in your thing, like reach out, right? Yeah. I mean, it's kind of incredible the way that humans will move in to support one another when they need it. Good humans. And it's kind of incredible how good humans help lift each other up even when we don't know each other, right? And I don't want to get into it here because it's not appropriate for here, but where I look at people that have really just disappeared, not always, but a lot of times it's like their motivations weren't right in the first place. Something happened to them and they're gone. And you go, well, what happened to them? And it's like, again, there are exceptions to this, but I don't know, their heart probably wasn't in it. Or, there was enough of a terrible circumstance there that it had to go that way. But, I think it's just I heard from a former postdoc of mine recently and another one, both of whom are professors now. And through the philanthropy arm of my podcast and some donors, I'm able to support scientific research. We do this. Like, we don't do it for public recognition. We do it because I want to support the best science, and we're able to do that. And I can't tell you the joy, just pure joy that it brings me to hear about them and their students that they're mentoring. Like, there's a passage of this stuff over time. And look, none of us live forever, except Bryan Johnson. Just kidding. And by the way, if people want to know my take on Bryan, I've known Bryan for a long time. We go way back. And I think it's wonderful that he's doing what he's doing. And I think he's, I don't know him well enough to say, like, people always want to know, like, what's he, I think it's great that somebody's exploring the field of longevity from the perspective he is and other perspectives. So for that matter.
I got to give you my take on Bryan. So I've seen Bryan in person maybe 2 or 3 times. I was at Roatan, an island off Honduras, with him.
Okay.
At the start of this year, and then I did a Jeffersonian dinner.
Oh yeah.
Breakfast with him.
Very Bay Area to do a Jeffersonian dinner.
Yeah. Well, he brought some of the Bay Area over, and I had some of his nutty pudding, and I had to sit down with him, and the way that I think of Bryan is kind of like a scout in an army. So it wouldn't do to have an entire army filled with scouts. It would be a pretty shitty army. Mm-hmm. But I'm more than happy to have that one guy who apparently is built to be a scout go up that really dangerous hill over there that maybe the view's beautiful, or maybe you slip and a catastrophe occurs or something, and come back and tell us what he found. Mm-hmm. I love that. Thank you.
He's a bit of an astronaut.
Correct. Yeah. You expend time and effort and resources and all of that, finding out stuff. I'm all for him doing that. And I'll take the, top 20% or whatever that gives the 80% of the insights from him.
Yeah. He's part of this incredible tapestry that's being built of public-facing health and science information. Never before in human history has health and science information been dispersed in the way that it is now, through podcasts, through traditional media, from physicians, from scientists, from ancient wisdom stuff. I mean, I can sit back from all of it, see Bryan, see my position in the field, see the Lane Norton, see the people that attack us, see the FDA, see the NIH, and I can look at it and, listen, I was on a grants review panel until, a little over 12 months ago. I was a regular member on there. I've reviewed grants, written grants, fortunately gotten many grants funded. Plenty of grants didn't get funded too. I understand the process, and I understand people's different orientation, and realize that we're all after the same thing. We all want to live longer, healthier lives with more vitality. Like, we're all after the same thing. And what I'm interested in is the overlap in the Venn diagrams. So if you call it Yoga Nidra or NSDR, if you're talking about REM sleep and the dynamics of spindle waves in the brain, or you're talking just about your dreams and you're doing a dream journal, ultimately, I'm interested in the practices that are true now, that have always been true, and that can evolve through technology that are going to allow us all to be healthier mentally, physically, et cetera. That's the mission. So you nailed it. You want a Bryan Johnson on the mission. You want a Lane Norton on the mission. I like to think you want an Andrew Huberman on the mission. You want Chris on the mission. You want all these people on the mission. And the FDA and the NIH, and you want the arguments. What you don't want, and what I see is incredibly counterproductive, is people taking the stance that only their view is the appropriate one. As long as people voice their motivations and their logic for proposing what they propose, it's mostly all good, except the stuff that's dangerously bad.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's not good. But listen, I chuckle at the idea that any one of these perspectives is going to be the perspective. And in fact, I throw my head back and laugh, because if you look historically, all you have to do, if you really are having trouble sleeping, or if you really want a dense book, The Prince of Medicine is a beautiful book that talks about Galen and how our understanding of the human body and medicine really evolved from really people being allowed to do more and more in terms of human dissection and analyzing the human body, something that wasn't allowed prior because of rules about dissecting human bodies. And the understanding that government bodies plus funding plus curiosity have all, been these competing forces, and that the acceleration of science and medicine is now taking place at a rate that is unprecedented. CRISPR, brain-machine interface. And yes, I'll say it, psychedelics and supplementation, they're just compounds. People go, supplements, none of that's regulated. Yeah. And you could also have a conversation about SSRIs, which have huge value, but can also do huge damage. So any qualified psychiatrist will tell you that. So right now we are on an accelerated path. And I think the challenge for most people is they're drinking from the fire hose and they don't know which filters to put up. And so all I can say is it's super exciting. Right? It's super, super exciting, but you want to argue about these different orientations about as much as you want to argue about which genre of music is best. There's just no answer, right? Most people love Taylor Swift, and there are people that also love other forms of music, and you're always going to find outliers at the extremes. So unless something is dangerous, right? I think that most of the ideas I see out there warrant further exploration, and some are just really darn good. So I'm glad that Bryan came up, because I think he represents one spoke on the wheel, and it's an important one. In his absence, I think the field will progress less quickly. Mm-hmm. I just wish that people would look at things through these lenses. I also think for the generation coming up that were weaned on social media, it's very important that they realize something that David Goggins has said. I just feel like it's appropriate to say this right now. Right now, because most of what's happening online is a consumer-based environment, I think he said it's easier than ever to become extraordinary now. That it's hard to overstate the power of putting away the phone and doing some writing, or putting away the phone and doing some musical training, or putting away and then using social media as a place to put your efforts out into the world, as opposed to place your efforts while standing there obliviously in the real world. Like the people that realize that the direction of flow needs to be from real world into electronic world and out, as opposed to the other way, are going to be the ones that are going to succeed in life. Barring some accident or injury, you're almost guaranteed success relative to your peers. It's that simple.
I remember, and we've spoken about this before, but I remember when NMN, rapamycin, NAD, sublingual, mix it in the yogurt, do all of this stuff. I remember when that was, going to make us all live to 150. And what is the state of the world of longevity drug supplements now? What's happening with that?
Yeah, I just did an episode with Peter Attia. So here's the deal, as I understand it. Peter is pretty bullish on rapamycin. Remember that mTOR, which is expressed at very high levels in essentially all cells of the brain and body during development, declines across the lifespan. mTOR, mammalian target of rapamycin. That's named after the drug that targets that receptor. Rapamycin targets the mTOR, and in some sense mimics fasting. Okay, this is broadly speaking. Keep in mind that the studies showing extension of life in different species, including mice, show that being fairly dramatically sub-maintenance caloric extends lifespan. But you're also potentially sub-happiness when you're that sub-caloric. Potentially pretty weak immunologically too, potentially physically weak. Okay, so yes, starving yourself within reason can extend your lifespan, but you also starve yourself of joy, and vigor, right? I mean, at some point you are subcaloric enough that testosterone levels plummet in men and women, libido plummets, fertility plummets in men and women. So, it's a trade-off. I don't take rapamycin. I don't take metformin. I don't even take berberine, which is poor man's metformin. It makes me very hypoglycemic for reasons that make total sense based on the mechanisms of metformin and berberine. I do take sublingual NMN, but this is very important, but I don't take it to extend my lifespan. I take sublingual NMN. And by the way, I have no affiliation to any supplement company that sells NMN. I take it because it has, for me, in my experience, again, this is not a randomized control trial. This would not meet Lane-Nortian criteria. It causes my hair to grow very, very fast, which is odd, but other people I know who've taken it report the same effect. Nails very thick and gives me a lot of morning energy.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So that's the reason I take it. Right. But I don't expect it to make me live longer. Now, the history around NMN is worth paying attention to. It was David Sinclair that popularized NMN. Remember, NMN is a precursor to NAD. NR is the precursor to NMN. So there's a phosphate group that gets removed. People that are not David Sinclair are fairly bullish about NR being preferable to NMN, but the people who are proponents of NR, true Niagen associated folks, et cetera, tend to focus more on the anti-inflammation effects of NR and point to the fact that NR has been shown to convert to NAD in cells more readily than NMN. Now, all I know is that when I take sublingual NMN, my hair grows faster, my nails grow thicker and faster, two effects that I wasn't seeking, but that I'm okay with. And I have more morning energy. I've also taken NR and I didn't notice any tangible effect. I don't take it because it's very expensive relative to NMN. And even though I probably could afford it, I didn't subjectively feel much, which is not to say it isn't worthwhile. People might be interested in taking it. The NMN was popularized because David Sinclair started talking about it on various podcasts. And then he started a company that is evaluating it as a drug in a clinical trial. Therefore, the FDA said that NMN could not be sold as a supplement. That's the way the laws work. But then supplement manufacturers continued to do so, and it does not seem like the FDA is clamping down on it, at least not hard, because you can go on Amazon or you can go to any one of these different companies and buy NMN if you wish. So that's the story there. In terms of other things and why don't I take rapamycin? Not enough human data. And honestly, my goal is to live to be 100 or 110 with vigor. And I'm not so interested in living to be 150.
Metformin?
No, not interested in plummeting my blood sugar. Berberine, not interested in plummeting my blood sugar. Gives me headaches unless I'm eating a lot of carbohydrates with it. The only time I've taken berberine, and I might take it again, is I used to do cheat days. I don't any longer, where I could eat a dozen donuts. If I take 500 milligrams of berberine first, I feel fine. Otherwise, I feel like my eyes get blurry and I want to pass out. It's kind of fun to do every once in a while. But if I don't eat a lot of carbohydrates or sugar with berberine, then I get a massive hypoglycemic headache. And I feel like, it almost feels like my head is made of stone. It's very strange feeling. I don't like it. Other things for longevity: taking good care, don't get hit in the head, avoid excessive stress, all the basic kind of things that we all know. So the longevity field is a peculiar one. I mean, it could be that Bryan is onto something with the exosomes and with again, I don't want to throw out things that I'm not aware that he's doing. I think it's some PRP, exosomes. I do red light. I think there's enough data for red light therapy, whole body red light. Naked in front of the panel, 10 minutes, 5 minutes facing, 5 minutes from behind, or facing away, as it were. For sake of eye health, the data from Glenn Jeffrey's lab showing that red light therapy, especially in the early part of the day, may offset some age-related vision decline. This is my colleague Glenn Jeffrey at University College London. Beautiful studies. He might be a fun person for you to talk to. He's been in the game a long, long time. Red light therapy for mitochondrial health, these sorts of things. And then, dosing with stress appropriately, but not overdoing stress. Making sure to get enough sleep, having a joyful life. I love this. Joy is efficiency and longevity, perhaps, as well. I'm bolstered by observing my dad, who, might have a glass of wine every once in a while, but never drank very much, who exercises but never overdid it, who always worked 9 to 5 and then would put down the pen, and he's a theoretical physicist after all, and would focus on walks and getting sunlight and thinking. He would often take walks and think about science, he would tell me, but didn't overwork himself, but was very, very consistent. I think he just filed like more, he's in excess of 70 patents, and he's going strong. He was also somebody that moved to the United States in the era of the 1960s and told stories about people, passing joints. And he was like, no, like I worked my butt off to get out of a country where they didn't support science. He had this opportunity from the Navy to come here and study on scholarship, and decided, he's sort of like all drugs bad kind of guy. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think nowadays I and others have a kind of a more adapted, nuanced view of things like cannabis. Probably okay for some, probably good for others, and probably terrible for others. So I think that moderation goes a long way, including in exercise. I mean, if you look at people who marathon and ultra, they don't age as well as, in my opinion, as people, certainly better than people that are sedentary. But when you look at, for instance, people who are very heavily muscled, they don't age very well. You look at people who do a ton of ultra endurance, they don't age terribly well. You look at some of the older sprinters out there, older gymnasts. I'll pass you a clip of this guy. He's 98 years old. I sent this to Rick Rubin the other day, and we were just blown away. The guy doing a two fingers of each hand, doing a pull-up. I think the guy's Chinese, and then doing a skin the cat. So rolling his feet in, shoulder extension, skin the cat, then back out, and then a chin up, and then walking away from it. Now, he looks 98 at the level of his skin sag and his face and his gait, but holy moly, does he have grip strength and flexibility? And I want to be that guy at 98. I don't know what he's doing in the other domains of his life, but I'm pretty sure it's impressive.
What is the reason for the concern on ultra athletes? Is that free radicals? I've heard that. I don't even know what they are.
It's just stress.
Right.
I mean, and I think I went up to the Olympic track and field trials in Oregon, and it was amazing. And I met some of the best marathoners in the world. And I know Cam Hanes well, as you do. And he, and Cam pushes himself hard. I think that, again, better that than to be sedentary. I think for Cam, I can't speak for him, but I don't think he has a choice but to push himself that way. Right. But he's pretty.
I don't think he's pushing. He's being pulled.
He's being pulled. Yeah. Well, and he's got it up. I think it's all coming through him. I know probably some people are like, oh God, here we go again with that whole thing. But there's something about when you access these sources of guidance and energy that are outside you, that feel bigger than you and are bigger than you. If nothing else, we can agree on that. Cam carries a fair amount of muscle as well, which I think is protective against some of the muscle wasting that occurs when people are running really far, really long, over and over and over. It's stress.
Did you see that guy that ran the entire length of Africa?
No, but that's super impressive.
World first guy. From the north-south Cape Town, the absolute bottom to Turkey.
And it can't be a straight line.
No. It's a huge.
There's a lot of jungle.
He ran for a year. So
this is some Forrest Gump kind of stuff.
Correct. And Ross Edgley, do you remember Ross? He swam around the UK. He was the first man to ever swim around the UK.
Yeah.
So he's just completed. He would be great. I'm going to try and twiddle the dials on Rob to see if you guys want to speak. He's just completed the world's longest single distance non-stop swim.
How far?
300 miles. Without touching land, without stopping, without sleeping. It was over 50 hours. Eating in the water, pooping in the water. The first time he had to go to
a fish.
The first time he had to go to the bathroom, he's got like a butt flap on his thing. He missed the butt flap, so then just churned his poop for the next 50 hours as he did this swim. Apparently they cut him out of it. And there was like this sort of gray dust inside of him, which is what, if you churn your own feces for long enough, apparently that happens. But Ross, he was the first man to swim around the UK.
Amazing.
So he did 6 hours on, 6 hours off for 6 months.
Amazing.
6 hours on, 6 hours off for 6 months.
The human, the human spirit is like one of these things that I just marvel in. I'm curious, Chris, what do you see as your long arc? Are you like, I'm in caterpillar mode. I'm thinking, I'm thinking about the microplastics episode that I'm preparing. Like what, now I'm focused on where we are right now, but and a book and some other things in the not too distant future. But how old are you?
36.
Man, you're young. I mean, you look young, but so do you have aspirations for politics? You'd be great.
No. Very flatteringly, Rogan and Cam Haines said that they would vote for me if I ran for president, but they can't because he's British. No, none of that.
You could run in the UK.
Yeah, I'm sure that. The UK is a whole other challenge at the moment that I don't intend on stepping foot into. One of the interesting things that I've learned, I think, over the last 2.5 years since moving to America is if there's ever a period of sort of rapid growth or development, optionality in life opens up so rapidly and the potential universes branch so quickly that any real long-term plan is kind of pointless. This is maybe a cope because I struggle with long-term planning. I know that the way that you're supposed to live the most fulfilling life from my productivity bro background is to write your obituary, and then, you're in 25-year eons, and then you're in 7-year phases, and then you're in 1-year sprints, and you're in 90-day blocks, and you've got your daily actions which contribute to you, so on and so forth. I've never been able to really think more than about 6 months ahead. And the last 2 years, I would have never thought 2.5 years ago that I would have been living in America, that I would have been doing this sort of a thing, that the show would have been where it was, that I would have had the opportunities I would. And especially if the things that you want to have happen start to happen to you, the pace is so unimaginable that you need to learn to develop the skill to say no to things that you would have only dreamt to have had the opportunity to have been in the room, to have pitched, to have said yes to 6 months ago. And it's like reverse hedonic adaptation. You're permanently having to reset your baseline of what you should expect from yourself, from your life, from the way that you show up, and the challenges completely change. So I know that I want to have a family. I know that I want to be a dad. I'm very excited about that. I know that I love learning and having these sorts of conversations. I know that it's incredibly gratifying to be seen as a peer by people that you also admire and that you aspire to emulate. That's unbelievably cool. I think that, especially because I grew up in, a town in the UK famous only for having the highest teen pregnancy rating in England, and then it lost that, so it didn't really even have that.
What's the name of the town?
Stockton-on-Tees. And it's just, classic northern working town, nothing spectacular there, apart from the railway was actually invented there. But when I was growing up, I didn't have a massive number of role models like the person I wanted to be like. But I had a lot of people like the person I didn't want to be like. So I came up with this idea of the reverse role model, which is if you are in a kind of a role model desert, we hear about food deserts. If you're in a role model desert, that's not great, but I think more people's lives are sideswiped by making errors than by expediting success. And it meant that I was able to grow up and say, well, I don't want his relationship with his family, and I don't want the way that he uses alcohol to cope with his problems, and I don't want his issue that he's got with gambling. And it creates these sort of way markers in the ground, not ones that you go to, but ones that you avoid, sort of helps you to map out the minesweeper territory. And
can I just one thing that's extraordinary about what you're saying is deserving of a neuroscience analogy. I started off as a developmental neurobiologist, so I teach embryology and brain development to medical students and graduate students, among other things in neuroscience. And one of the things that we learned over the last 20, 30 years is that the brain, the nervous system, so brain and spinal cord, without question, the most complex and incredible object in the entire universe. Without question, right? I mean, just think about what human brains have created in terms of other technologies. Those are all the product of the brain, right? Elon's rockets, X, this podcast, everything here, these cars, are the product of this object, this, 2.5 pounds or whatever, depending on the size of someone's head and brain. The nervous system starts off from, you have sperm meets egg. What happens before that is it varies, but it has certain required elements. Sperm meets egg, and then there's duplications of the cells. And some of those cells become limbs, and some of the cells become fingernails, et cetera. But a certain number of those cells become designated as nervous system. And then you have literally trillions of neurons, nerve cells, that are independent of one another, little spheres that need to connect to one another in immensely precise ways in order for you to be able to see the world around you, to smell the world around you, to make sense of when milk is coming, when food is coming, to form traumas and to have dopamine-related reward experience. A big mystery in the field of brain development for over a century was how is it that the neurons find the right connections, given the exquisite precision that allows for all these incredible abilities of the brain, the most magnificent object in the universe. And for a long time, it was thought that, there would be what are called chemoattractants. There would be things that would lead the neurons to steer in the right direction and wire up. And indeed, those chemoattractants exist. They go by the names of things like netrin, which means to guide, or ephrin, or et cetera. But far and away, by an order of magnitude, most wiring in the nervous system occurs by selective repulsion. In other words, by neurons growing out, looking for something to connect to, and chemical labels saying, not here, not here, nope, not here. And neurons trying so hard to form connections wherever they can. And these, as they're called, repellent, not repulsive, because repulsive seems like, but repellent forces, corridoring them into progressively more precise and more precise and more precise connections, so that by time a baby is born, after 9 months or so, the wiring of the brain and spinal cord is such that they're ready for life. And then more wiring occurs. And most of the wiring that occurs after we're born, the so-called neuroplasticity, is a selective removal of connections as opposed to the formation of new connections.
Pruning.
And so as you're describing your experience of growing up in this town whose name I can't remember right now. Stockton, the origin of the train.
Yes.
You describe all these repellent forces. I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be like that. And it highlights such a key principle, which is that, we think of a really good life as being the consequence of selective decisions for, running toward, not away from type decisions. But I think what you raise is incredibly important and is not discussed enough, which is that so much of a good life, a right life, an incredibly successful life involves no, definitely not that, and a selective pruning and a selective repellent mechanism away from the wrong territory. And so forgive me for waxing poetic on brain development in relevance to your life experience, because your life experience is far more, rich in terms of what it means. But I think that if ever there was an analogy for how you've emerged and the trajectory that you've taken, it's the wiring of the central nervous system.
Yeah, I think avoiding catastrophe is significantly more profitable than trying to expedite success.
Amen to that.
There's this idea from mathematics, which is never multiply by 0. So if you take 20 multiplied by 3, multiplied by 400,000, multiplied by 1.3, multiplied by 0, you get 0. So you can do all of the good work in the world. You can avoid eating seed oils, and you don't put any fucking sun lotion on your testicles, and you get all of your light in the morning. And
some sunscreens are safe. Despite what the internet says, I believe in some sunscreens. I lost friends for saying that, but it's true.
What was your thing about people will lose so much sleep and friends over debating seed oils?
Oh, goodness. Seed oils or the sunscreen thing. Look, mineral-based sunscreens, everyone agrees are safe, except the few people that don't like sunscreen at all. But I'm not one of those people. I believe in sunscreen. I wear zinc oxide sunscreen. But according to the internet, you find all sorts of lies about the opposite. So anyway.
So you multiply by 0. You've done all of this stuff. You've been resistance training 3 times a week, listened to the Huberman Lab pod, even subscribed on whatever your thing is, podcast thing, and got the additional AMA. And then you decide one day to just drive without a seatbelt on.
Or what happened to me 2 weeks ago. I'm heading to the podcast. I've got to get my run in. I love running. I'm going to take a quick run. I run down my street. I'm live on a hill. I run into the park nearby, run into a podcast van. We hang out for a little bit, jog together. I split off and head home, and I'm heading home and I'm thinking, how am I going to get home, do my 5 minutes meditation, shower, and get ready and make it to the podcast studio in time? I'll just do my meditation now. Brilliant idea, Professor Huberman. So I close my eyes.
While you're running?
Yeah. And I'm striding up the hill, and it's a big, wide street. And I'm thinking, and all of a sudden, brack, and I go right into a box truck. And I'm thinking, now I've been hit before. I boxed a little bit, skateboarded. I've hit my head. I'm not tough, but I've hit my head. I reach up. I'm like, oh, and there's enough blood on my hand. I'm like, oh boy.
It's a big one.
It's a big one. And then I feel it gape. I'm like, oh boy. So it turned out it was like ocular bone exposed, not good, no bueno. Ran right into a parked box truck. Okay. Hey, I'm the absent-minded professor at times. Meditate when you get home, folks. Fortunately, I have a friend who I know through training and common friends. His name is Jason Diamond, and he's one of the world's best facial plastic surgeons. I didn't care so much about a scar, but he assured me we can do this without a scar. He said, you have to get in and get it stitched up within 6 hours.
You're kidding. So
I go to his clinic. Fortunately, they flushed it out. He wasn't there that day.
Meanwhile, Rob's waiting at the studio.
With the guest from Stanford, amazing professor named Jamil Zaki, who's brilliant. And they put a couple injections of Novocaine, suture me up, and a week later, I'm pretty good.
That was only a week ago?
Yeah. Jason and his clinic are absolute phenoms. Yeah.
Did he explain to you the importance of the 6 hours?
To avoid infection. It's the infection that gets in there. They, flushed it, put some local antibiotic. All I put on it was a little bit of Neosporin, Polysporin after it was stitched. Got the stitches out a week. It's been a week and 4 days. Yeah.
You're like Wolverine.
Yeah. Normally I don't heal that well. Now I will say this for the record, I've been experimenting with BPC 157, for which there are basically zero human data, tons of animal data. And anyone that's taken BPC 157, by the way, you don't want to take it continuously. And if you're going to take it, get it from a compounding pharmacy and get it prescribed by a doctor, because there's a lot of contaminated versions out there. I would never take an oral version. It does cause angiogenesis, growth of blood vessels. So if you have a tumor, you could cause angiogenesis of the tumor. So, but I was taking it sub-Q.
Yep.
And I do heal noticeably faster when taking BPC 157. But were I not to have had that injury, and I had a little bit of a calf thing I was trying to repair, I would not take BPC 157 continuously just to take it.
Yep.
And nowadays I hear about a lot of young guys just taking it the same way they just take testosterone cypionate, which is just foolish.
Yeah. 2 stories. I ruptured my Achilles 4 years ago. I took TB 500 and BPC 157 for the 6 weeks after that.
So you tore your Achilles?
Complete detachment. Yeah, full rupture. I mean, you can even see if you lean over there, you can just.
Oh, he's not lying. That thing looks like a zipper.
I've got the scar.
It looks like a zipper.
Got the scar to show it.
Right.
So
how'd you do that?
Playing cricket, the most British way.
Oh yeah, that's a confusing sport.
Yeah. So I did that TB 500, BPC 157, 6 weeks, and the recovery was very good. It was also during a pandemic. I had nothing else to do, and I was beyond psychotic, like probably 95 to 98% compliance with sets, reps, recover, everything. Did
you, curious, because there's no clinical studies on this. So when I talked to Peter Attia about BPC 157, he's like, no clinical data. But then you talk to, let's just say, X game athletes, or let's say you're me and you talk to Olympic athletes.
BPC is still allowed, right? Because it's naturally gastrointestinally.
I don't think it's allowed in the Olympics. I will tell you that many, many athletes used BPC 157 to recover from injury more quickly.
TB 500 is very restricted, but BPC 157 seems to be less restricted.
Yeah. I worry about any conversation about this only if people think, oh, I'm just going to take this so I can recover bigger biceps. Cancer is nothing you want.
This is the second thing I want to tell you about. So Chase, who isn't here today, lead strategist for us, he had started to hear about some of the great effects that you get from BPC 157. I think that he took an oral version of it.
Yeah, those are out there.
Have you heard about this anthymia response, where it just creates a persistent feeling of hopelessness that is inescapable?
No, but that sounds horrible. Don't do it, folks. Taking BPC 157 or injecting testosterone cypionate because you just want more gains and recover in the gym is absolutely foolish. You know, I've talked about these things before. You know, I was 45 before I touched anything, and you need to bank sperm if you want kids. You need to take HCG if you want to maintain sperm production. You need to keep dosages low. I also did an experiment where I went on and then went off. I would not take these things continuously unless you're working with a physician and they say you need it. I'm living proof that you don't need to do it continuously. And I would also say that when it comes to BPC 157, the angiogenic effects are really the most concerning. Again, you could get vascularization of tumors. The one peptide
is that mediated whether you take it orally or sub-Q?
Nobody knows. So I was going to ask, did you inject it locally into the, because I wasn't injecting my eye.
No, so I was shooting your typical sort of love handle spots. TB500 just because I was trying to get it as close. So it was sort of the fat on the inside of your calf. I was shooting it in there just in case it maybe some sort of site.
There's probably some local effect. Here's what we know about BPC 157. It's from the animal studies. It seems able to detect injury in some very interesting way and lead to fibroblast. There's a certain kind of cell type relevant to tendon, et cetera.
It's actual Achilles tendon ruptures in the mice or the rats that they're using.
That's right.
So I thought, well, God, if it's ever going to work for anything.
And sciatic nerve as well.
Okay.
And what's also interesting is there are a couple peptides that I think are going to be discussed more and more. You know, BPC 157 and Ozempic are the ones you hear the most about. Those are, after all, both peptides, as is insulin, by the way. For sleep, pinealin, which is related to regeneration and support of the pineal gland. Very interesting. Maybe we talk about this in a year or so when there's more data. Cortigen, things that are relevant to the TREC1 pathway and can accelerate nerve growth. Not track receptors, BDNF, not that pathway, but TREC1. There's a lot of interest now. Bryan Johnson very interested, and others interested in cerebrolysin, which is sold in Europe but not the US.
I'm taking cerebrolysin at the moment.
Are you?
Yeah.
How do you feel?
I've only shot it once, so that's IM.
So you're taking cerebrolysin?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've taken once.
I've never tried it.
No. So I've used it once. I need to shoot again. I have to say, I just get nervous with IM injections generally. It's a fucking big old needle to be shooting in. And it's a...
Why use a big needle?
Because it's a pretty hefty dose. It's 5 mil.
5 mils?
5 mil.
Oh my goodness.
You're not going to put that through an insulin pen.
Oh, yeah.
You know, unless you're going to draw it up each time, 5 individual injections.
That reminds me, we didn't close the hatch on NAD. Have you ever done an NAD infusion?
Yes, number of times.
Yeah, and it feels like an elephant is stepping on your legs.
I mean,
and you're getting kicked in the groin.
Have you tried that with, what's the stuff that stops you from Zolfran?
Yeah, I don't like taking medication if I can avoid it. So I just...
You did it without the Zolfran?
I do it, but I didn't infuse it that fast. Now, I will say this. I've done NAD infusions. You feel horrible while it's going in. You feel better afterwards, but it's always hard to dissociate from the, saline that you're bringing into your system, because a saline drip feels pretty good. Could be. We don't know.
So we don't know. There's a place in Austin, Kuya, which I go to, which is really great.
Great sauna. It's cold plunge. And the salt baths there are great too. Yeah. The flotation tanks.
So they do the NAD infusions, and they'll do it with Zolfran. So I'm there with James, Newtonic guy, my housemate Zach, and she says, "Do you want the thing to stop you feeling?" So I was like, yeah, of course. And classic, 3 guys in a row, we just start opening up the taps on this thing to the point where it's just pouring in.
Yeah, the idea here that Chris is referring to is that when you do an NAD infusion, they'll offer to give it to you over the course of 3 hours, 2 hours, 1 hour. I heard, and this is just lore, that Rogan does it in like 30 minutes.
I think he does it in less.
The faster you go in, you put it in, the faster you infuse, the more painful it is. And if you don't take the Zoltran, it's called, something like that, the anti-nausea medication, you feel like you want to vomit, you feel irritable, but then when it's done, the moment it's done,
it's off.
You definitely feel better. I just don't know what the source of the effect is. But the rationale there is that unlike NR, NMN, which need to be converted, to NAD, the direct infusion of NAD, either by sublingual electrophoretic patch or by, IV infusion, is supposed to get into your cells more readily. But again, and it tends to be pretty expensive. It's a couple $100 or more.
Really expensive.
Yeah. I haven't been doing NAD infusions consistently. These days I'm back to real basics. I mean, I still do the basics.
I will give you my review on what I'm doing at the moment. But right now, BPC 157, thymosin alpha.
Are you injured?
Thymosin beta.
What's the rationale?
I'm doing this mold detox, very aggressive mold detox. So
mold detox. Yeah. I've heard this like that. People who are like a number of people that I know from Austin claim
particularly a bad thing in Austin. So I haven't spoken about this.
The damp nights, hot days.
Yeah. I haven't spoken about this on the show yet. We're kind of tracking everything, and I'll bring it up at some point. But that cerebrolysin, MOTC. So I've got a peptides is a very important part. I'm also doing ozone therapy. Have you ever tried that?
No.
So half a pint of blood is taken out of you, put into a bag with an anticoagulant, and then a antimicrobial gas is pushed into the bag. So it almost looks like it's carbonating your blood.
Yes, you're going sci-fi.
Oh, I've got everything. I'm doing 25-gram IV. And
you don't even live in Los Angeles.
No, but there's places alive and well in Austin. It's phenomenal for this. Glutathione IV, phosphatidylcholine, red light therapy, lymph massage, everything to try and fix. I've got my brain fog at the moment.
You look healthy.
Thank you.
You seem very sharp.
I don't feel it, but it's working along. One thing that I did want to loop back to that you mentioned earlier on. You're teaching an undergraduate course. How is that not going to be the most oversubscribed cues out of the? I mean, people go to see you do talks in Australia. How are you able to organize a course at a university? Surely that's just going to be everybody and their sister is going to come along.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I've taught consistently. I've never taken a formal sabbatical. I have sabbatical time accrued where I could not teach. But during the pandemic, we were mostly remote teaching. I was directing our course in neuroanatomy for medical students and teaching. I did some in-person lectures. Last year, I did a remote lecture. Because my main appointment is in the medical school, you either have to teach or do research in order to fulfill your obligation. So, at Stanford, we have the option to teach undergraduate courses. And I spoke to my chair, my new chair. I'm in 3 different departments now, but the chair I'm currently under. And we decided I would teach a undergraduate course in neuroscience and health in particular. It's also going to have some guest lectures, and we're going to make it a big course. So anywhere from 400 to 600 students. I've taught lectures that big before when I was.
You've got theaters of that size.
Oh yeah, they're they're not really amphitheater, but yeah, certainly big enough. Before I was at Stanford, my lab, I trained at Stanford as a postdoc, but then when I was a junior professor, meaning before I got tenure, I was at UC San Diego, and I taught a course called Neural Circuits in Health and Disease. Evening course started as 50 students and very quickly grew to 400 students. So I'm familiar with this kind of format. We read papers, we evaluate papers, we have guest lectures. I'm also getting some help from the students.
I was going to say, how many TAs are you going to have for this?
Probably going to need somewhere between 6 and 8 TAs. And what's interesting is that
it's a fucking platoon. It's like SEAL Team 6.
Yeah, and the TAs are amazing. I mean, they handle so much of the work related to kind of the mechanics, but obviously as an instructor, you need to coordinate that. And when I directed the neuroanatomy course, I had TAs, and there was a laboratory component as well where they dissect brains and things of that sort. Again, all made more difficult by the pandemic situation. It was really complicated, but they're phenomenal, so it worked out. I've reached out to some of the students who are helping me devise the curriculum, which is going to be a lot of fun. Learning from the students, like what are the things that you really want to understand? And they are phenomenal. I mean, obviously Stanford students, as our students elsewhere, just like phenomenal.
What age will these be?
So undergraduates, I suppose, when I went to college, I'm a fall baby. So I was born late September. So when I went off to college, I was still 17. I turned 18 my first month in school because we're on the quarter system, as is Stanford. So they're going to be somewhere between 18 and 22. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to get people in from computer science and AI. We're going to get people in from obviously neuroscience, bioengineering, chemistry, psychology. You should come up for a lecture. It's going to be a little bit of a challenge. We are definitely going to be checking IDs at the door.
I was going to say, it's like a fucking capacity problem. People are going to be sneaking in. You're going to have a turnstile.
I don't want to give away too much about this, but we will have a format by which enrolled students will be like, it'll be clear who those are and but we're not going to announce the location of the course like each day or anything. So
wow.
But yeah, it's a lot of fun. And people often want to know, like, can I come to Stanford and see your space and this, and unfortunately that can't happen.
I heard a rumor.
But these are going to be filmed. I should say that very likely Stanford Media is going to put these out there separate from the podcast.
I mean, if they ever wanted to get some free plays on YouTube, that's a pretty easy way to
Bob
do it.
Sapolsky's lectures at Stanford are some of the most popular.
The number of times that you see Introduction to Evolutionary Biology, that one famous photo of him in front of the board. How compatible have you found the life of a influencer, very well-known podcaster, with being a sort of responsible and in-depth researcher? Is that challenging to navigate those two things?
Yeah. So keep in mind, just to give people an orientation of how this went, in 2019, I started posting clips to Instagram just cause. In 2020, I started going on podcasts. I think I went on close to 30 podcasts in 2020, including Rogan and Rich Roll and Lex Friedman's podcast, Whitney Cummings' podcast. And then we launched the podcast, the Huberman Lab podcast, in January of 2021. From the time I've been 19 years old, I've been a student and working in a laboratory. I started my laboratory as an assistant professor when I was 35. I got tenure when I was 40, and I've been at Stanford since I was 40. I'm 49. I'm tenured there. And I ran my laboratory to pretty big capacity. At one point, I had a lot of students and postdocs and technicians and things of that sort. During the pandemic, I definitely shrunk the size of my research laboratory. In part, that was related to the pandemic. In part, it was related to the fact that I was doing more and more public-facing work. The Huberman Lab as a research lab still exists, but we do human clinical trials. And we published a paper in 2023 with my collaborator, David Spiegel, who's in the Department of Psychiatry, where we started doing those experiments remotely, people wearing Whoop bands and other devices to monitor their sleep and HRV, et cetera, while they were doing specific practices to mitigate stress. Currently, I'm involved in the generation of experiments in humans to evaluate non-sleep deep rest as it relates to patterns of activity in the human brain. Those are experiments that are spinning up with Matt Walker. They'll be done at Berkeley, as well as studies at Stanford through the Department of Ophthalmology and some other departments looking at visual repair. So this is a longstanding interest of mine, trying to understand and cure glaucoma, the second leading cause of blindness in the world, second only to cataract. So I still have research funds. And so the Huberman Lab exists now in that realm, working with clinicians. So gone are the days only recently, despite what you might read, but gone are the days now where you can walk into my laboratory and see mice that express green fluorescent protein and glow. That was not long ago where that was true. Or we had rainbow mice that glowed 12 different colors, not developed by me, but developed by others. But we use those tools where people were recording from neurons using extracellular electrodes. We've recorded from human brain in collaboration with Dr. Eddie Cheng at UCSF, recording from the human insula while people are in VR, looking at great white sharks that I filmed while doing VR. So I've been involved in a number of different styles of research, and I still am very much interested in research. I'm still on editorial committees and so forth. These days, because of the demands of the podcast and the fact that we're soon launching, in addition to the standard podcast, 30-minute, what we call essentials, 30-minute versions of the podcast, in addition to the long form, okay? Because I'm also writing the bonus chapters on my book, which is out next April, because I am going on podcasts and still very much involved in science philanthropy through SciComm, my company, and through a bunch of other venues. And I'm very much interested in lobbying for advancing treatments for the PTSD and other psychiatric challenges. Because I'm spread over a lot of things, I'm basically restricted to doing one or two studies per year or two. And I'm fortunate to have excellent collaborators and clinicians and postdocs that can carry that work, but we still have to look at data and analyze data and write papers. So, I think one of the people who's been very important as an example, but also a mentor, I've never said this out loud, was from an early stage, the Dr. Robert Sapolsky has been very generous with advice about how to navigate these sorts of things about being public facing and transitions from laboratory and teaching, et cetera. And I must say that Stanford has been wonderful in their support of the podcast. They've been wonderful in support of me evolving this new course curriculum. They've been wonderful in terms of embracing these new types of philanthropy to bring laboratories other than mine the kind of financial support that allows them to do really cutting edge science. So, one of my missions, and this wasn't discussed much publicly, but it should have been, is during the Obama administration, there was the Brain Initiative. It infused over $100 million into brain research. During the Trump administration that followed, that funding was maintained, although it changed names. Just this last year or so, the Brain Initiative was cut. The budget was cut by approximately 40%. And as a consequence, a lot of neuroscience laboratories were not able and are not able to do the important work that they need to do to develop treatments for Alzheimer's, for Parkinson's, for eating disorders, for addiction, and on, autism, et cetera. So a big part of my effort these days is to raise awareness and money from donors, but also from SciComm, my company, the parent company of the HLP, to bring money to researchers so they can do that work. And, I'm very passionate about this because as somebody who wrote grants for years, as somebody who ran a laboratory for years and still does, although in a more minor extent, the academic has to work two jobs. They have to work like a demon to raise the money to even begin to do the work. And oftentimes the best work takes years to evolve, and many granting agencies, sadly, will not fund work until it's already basically done, believe it or not. So I've become very, very passionate about raising more money for the best science. And one of the things I love about doing science philanthropy is that I can direct money to laboratories very quickly. In fact, I have one rule for giving funds to a laboratory. First of all, right now we're only funding human work, not animal work. Second, of course, the work has to be of excellent value and quality. But the grant application has to be one sentence and no more. You write me 2 sentences, you're not getting the money. I don't want a budget. I trust the best researchers to do excellent work. And then we give them the funds and they are unrestricted, meaning they have to spend them on research, but they can do the great work they want to do.
What's the coolest sentence that you've received?
We've given money to Joanna Steinglass's laboratory at Columbia University School of Medicine, and her stated goal is to find a cure for anorexia nervosa, the most deadly of all psychiatric illnesses, period. Now, that's a grant application, and it's one that I was happy to fund and that we're going to be happy to continue to fund. And it's been marvelous to see these billionaire donors and hundreds of $1 million in worth donors put their money into the pot. They've now 4x'd our initial contributions from SciComm, and it's continuing to grow. And it's just all the ecosystem's perfect,
Where can people go if they want to throw some money at the? Yeah,
so we fund it in part through our premium channel, which I do these AMAs. If people want to give to SciComm Philanthropy directly, they can. If people have money that they want to put towards science and they want to bypass all of that, they can. They could do that by contacting. Let me give the proper name. It would be Ian at SciComm with 2 M's, SciCommmedia.com. This is not money that I'm seeking for my own laboratory. This is me acting as a hub to distribute money to excellent laboratories. And, so this is a very important mission in my life, because I can tell you as a researcher who wrote grants for years that the amount of time and energy that talented researchers put into raising money to be able to do their work is extraordinary. And it's not that with money you can do successful science necessarily, but you can afford a lot more risk-taking, healthy risk-taking in science, and you just get more time to develop and analyze data. And, we have a dearth of funding. In this country, there's more funding for research than anywhere else in the world. The UK is pretty good as well. Germany's pretty good as well. Switzerland as well. There are other countries, but, the more money that goes into research, the faster cures are found. We know this. We know this from every disease that's ever been looked at. Where there's time, energy, a healthy dose of emotion, and money, you get cures for the most challenging diseases. This is absolute fact.
I've been thinking about this sort of a little bit of a juxtaposition that I see happening with you, maybe recently, or maybe it's always been there, but burbling below the surface, which is between cerebral horsepower, sort of cognition, rational, material science, and intuition, something which is a little bit more sort of ephemeral. It's kind of embodied. It's good,
there's no language for
good
it.
instinct in a way. As someone who spends a lot of time thinking about science and how it works, what is your advice for people on how to follow intuition more, how to blend the cognitive with the intuitive?
I can feel ideas in my body. And it's like, I can remember driving as a graduate student to visit friends in San Francisco, because I was in graduate school north of San Francisco, and feeling in my left arm, so weird, feeling in my left arm that I was going to do something new. And I ended up doing some writing for about music for a skateboarding magazine that led to a set of ideas that eventually led to this, the podcast, philanthropy, and so on. The nervous system, because it includes the brain and body, I think has a more ancient form of response and acts as more of a rudder in our sort of somatic awareness in our body. Our thinking obviously can be very structured, and I indeed try and train up both. Here's the exercise that I think is very useful, and it's going to seem really squishy and new agey, but it was given to me by the great Martha Beck, who's triple degreed from Harvard, who then developed a bunch of self-help, personal development tools to figure out right path, right life for whoever you are listening to this. And the exercise that I did based on one of her books years ago was, you sit quietly and you imagine something terrible, something really terrible, and you observe and feel how your body responds to that. The feeling of contraction that precedes the movement of your limbs or covering up. Then you relax it a bit, you shake that off, and maybe at a different time, maybe a few minutes later. So you do that several times, maybe for 5-10 minutes, set a timer. Then you do the opposite. You start imagining things that are absolutely, the word that comes to mind is very Martha Beckian, delicious to you, things that just feel so good, right? And don't limit yourself. And you experience, in a way, preceding any bodily movement, how your body, your face, your nervous system responds to that. And what you're doing is you're tapping into the more, in some sense, crude, more broad, but in other ways, more sensitive aspects of your nervous system to detect yes versus no. So many of the circuits of the brain work in a yum, yuck, meh kind of fashion, where you either want to move towards things, yum, away from things, what we call aversion, yuck, or meh, kind of neutral, right? Ambivalence. The body has the option to move toward, to remain where it's at, or to move away. And paying attention to the signals that precede those intuitive decisions and practicing them through these, she has this perfect day exercise, which has been very, very useful to me. I've started doing it again, where you take 10 minutes and you just, no limits. You just go, perfect day. What is your perfect day? And you just allow that to come up. What is the bed you wake up in? Where you look around the room, what's there? Allowing surprise and unanticipated things to enter the room. Maybe you wake up alone, maybe with one person, maybe with two people, maybe you have a dog, maybe you have a cat, maybe you have a fish, but you let some of that geyser up from your unconscious mind. As Paul Conti would say, the unconscious mind carries a wisdom based on your prior experience, maybe even the experience of people before you, that your conscious mind can work with, but you need to be able to access it, sometimes through dreams. But this perfect day exercise that Martha talks about allows this emergence of what's inside you and the directions that are really right for you. Okay, there's no limits on this. Now, what you're watching for in these different exercises is, again, how your nervous system responds before the action that you would take. So you're withholding action. So you're not going, oh, that feels terrible. And you're not going, oh, that feels great. You're paying attention to the neural signals that precede the impulse to do that. And you're playing with it. And I would say this is a great way to build your intuition and to learn to respond to it when you're conscious and moving through space. The other day I was on a phone call and I was just, all of a sudden I realized, like, I don't want to be on this phone call. I don't know what's happening. I don't want to be on it. I thought, yeah, Andrew, like, quit being such a wuss. Like don't be so emotional. Yep. And I realized, I was like, this is very energy draining to me. And I got off the phone call. Other things moving toward. I think that intuition in science, my dad talks a lot about this when we talked. Einstein talked a lot about this, not to put us in the same bin at all. But, you know, there's a story about Einstein, I know because my dad talks about him all the time, where someone gave him a picture to sign an autograph, a picture of Einstein. And Einstein put an arrow to his nose and said, the source of all my ideas, like his, you know, he could sense like where things were. You need to develop everyone needs to develop a sense for themselves of what steers them in a particular direction. What are the somatic signals? Again, the somatic signals, the signals of the body, are more crude in the sense that they are more divorced from language, but they are more sensitive. It reminds me of the neural retina. We have two systems of vision in the retina as humans. One that is the rod system, which is very sensitive. It's the one you use at dusk and at night to sense if there's anything in your environment. It's very sensitive. It can detect one photon, but it has very poor acuity. It's not very nuanced at the level of seeing boundaries or edges, but it will tell you if something is moving from behind a tree to get you. The cone system, as we call it, is far less sensitive. The cone system, in contrast, is far less sensitive, okay? It can't detect such subtle differences in luminosity, but it is exquisitely good at deciphering boundaries and color. In fact, it's the system that allows for trichromacy, which is what allows us to see this as yellow. And dogs see this probably as kind of a blunted orange or a burnt orange because they are dichromats, not trichromats. So I know that within the body, we have a sense of intuition that we can learn to listen to. The signals are very, very sensitive. You're like a tuning fork to your environment. Most people learn to suppress this, and we override it with thinking and cognition. People that can combine thinking and cognition with this more coarse language of the body are able to parse their life experience and the direction they're going to go in with exquisite sensitivity. And when you read shit, you don't even need to read. You can just listen to something Rick Rubin says, or you could do better and read his book. What you realize is that Rick is somebody who he's like a sensor for music. When he talks about his taste, he has this incredible ability to really let things waft over him and experience them and go, yes, more of that and less of that. He's a conductor, and he can say more of that, do more of that. But what's so unbelievable about Rick, so spectacular, is that when he steps away from that experience, he's boundaried. He's still himself. So it's kind of like empathy, but he can engage and disengage it in a very adaptive way, which is why he can create LL Cool J, Beastie Boys, Slayer. There, Rick, I mentioned Slayer because he gives me a hard time about not listening to Slayer. Slayer, right? You know, Adele, and on and on. He's able to sense what is good, what is extra good. And that's what taste is, in the same way that, you know, somebody who is expert in wines, how do you pronounce sommelier? What do you pronounce?
Sommelier.
Sommelier, the sommelier, or the chef, or the food taster, or the neurosurgeon. They know the precise movements. They know the chemistry and the ingredients. That's part of their training. But ultimately, it's the gestalt. It's the whole picture that's taken in. You sip the wine, right? You have to understand how the cut that you make in a neural circuit leads to changes network-wide, brain-wide, body-wide. And so being able to straddle those two levels of analysis is really the essence of being a virtuoso, right? And I'm not calling myself that. I'm referring to these other people that way, right? A virtuoso is somebody that can embrace all the levels of granularity in an exploration. All the details, but also the macroscopic picture, and then combine those in a way that's really unique. And I think that, you know, the basic training of anything is a layering up of formal training. I do believe that most people need a formal training. And then at some point you get to a level of expertise where your intuition is guiding you because it's grounded in all that knowledge. It comes forward in what look like very simple blocks, but those simple blocks are built on incredible depth of knowledge and understanding. And for myself, I spent a lifetime exploring biology and the nervous system. That's where my depth of expertise exists. But why are we now soon going to do, in addition to long episodes, shorter episodes? Well, some people only have 30 minutes and they want to know how to sleep better and they don't want to have to listen to 4 episodes at 4 hours long. So I want them to know the basic things to do. So I think having the offering and the understanding of different levels of granularity is key. And you do this, Chris. Listen, 3 years ago, I said to Rob, I go, in addition to all the podcasters that are already doing phenomenally well, I said, David Senra, Founders Podcast, and Chris, they're the ones that are going to be next level in a year. And I'm not saying I have a crystal ball, but boom, you guys are killing it. And I know that you're pointed at the sun and you're just going to continue along this trajectory. It's a felt thing because I can tell by the number of different topics, the number of different venues, the emphasis that you put on production, how you treat your team, the nuance that you put, the way that you articulate, the emphasis that you put on like the details of like, what's in your energy drink down to like the milligrams of this. This is like when you meet someone who runs a laboratory, they know at the beginning where everything is placed. At some point, they don't even know where the antibodies are because it's not their job to know. It's the student's job to know. But they knew how to know that when they needed to. And so I don't care if you're talking about Yo-Yo Ma, Rick Rubin, you, Rogan, Lex, it's all the same thing. And what people need to understand is that you have to get the formal, rigorous training, or if there's no degree in what you do, it's just hour upon hour upon hour upon hour. And then eventually it starts to look like a kind of shorthand and just natural, but that's built on deep, deep, deep expertise.
If you never learn the rules of the game, there's no such thing as breaking the rules. You're just playing the wrong sport.
That's right.
So you have to have that grounding. Yeah, I mean, my background in nightlife, we always wanted our guys to come up from being a guest lister. That's what we did. We gave out wristbands in the rain, in the cold, asking people, where are you going tonight, darling? And after 6 months, then you get to stand on the front door. And then after you stand on the front door, you get to work out how the tills work. And then after you've done that, and you work all the way up. And I think that there's something very reassuring about hearing somebody, maybe they don't know as much as the audio engineer or as the director of photography or as the producer or as the whatever, but they can hold the conversation. They go, I was there when it was at a lower resolution and now you're beyond my skill set, but I can hold the conversation and all the way up. And there's a kind of respect that commands. And I really like that. I've always wanted to sort of embody that and develop that in myself. And I guess there's some many disadvantages to kind of being obsessive and very attentive and very vigilant, but there's a ton of advantages as well.
Huge advantages. I mean, my friend Eddie Chang is the chair of neurosurgery at UCSF. Okay. He's one of, if not the best neurosurgeon in the world, at least in the top 3. He's constantly evolving his craft, as is Joe. And this might seem as if it's some sort of promotional thing, but I just want to point out, because it's relevant to the conversation we're in and some of the things that have surfaced, like in terms of like sponsors that I'll work with. No, I didn't say you can go from a 2 to a 7. That was AI. I didn't promote that company. There's a lot of AI and bullshit out there using our face, name, and likeness. But the sponsors that I work with, whether or not it's AG1, 8 Sleep, Element, these sponsors, the reason I work with those sponsors is, yes, I use those products, AG since 2012. But in addition, in particular with AG1 and 8 Sleep, they are constantly improving the product they're making. It's very interesting to see how the companies that are doing best are the ones that come under the most scrutiny and are also the companies that are doing the most innovative iteration year after year after year after year. Why? Because they've been in the game a long time and they continue to iterate on more or less the same thing over and over and over. Now, some people would say, okay, creatine monohydrate, right? I'm not involved in any company that promotes creatine monohydrate. I take creatine monohydrate. I have since I was 17 years old. At that time, everyone said it was going to blow out your kidneys or whatever. But anyway, I read about it in a MM2000 issue. For those of you that remember, I was like, whoa, this stuff really works. Turns out it doesn't destroy your kidneys. Okay. It's also good for cognition, it turns out. But does creatine monohydrate need to be evolved? No, it's a single ingredient type of formulation that some people might find benefit from. No requirement to take it. I'm not selling it anyway. But when it comes to things that are blends of things, or it comes to a sleep technology, so like AG1, like H-Sleep, and again, people might think, oh, this is just an ad in disguise. No, I will only work with companies that are telling me, yes, we're constantly working to make the purity better and better and better. 99.9% isn't good enough. We're constantly trying to make a cooling bed better. It's now going to help you offset snoring. Amazing. The sleep tracker on H-Sleep is exquisitely good. It's laboratory grade sleep tracking. The companies that succeed over time, like Apple. I mean, I'm from the Bay Area after all, like Apple, we see YouTube. I mean, they're constantly updating things, constantly updating the algorithms, Instagram, constantly Meta, and X is evolving. And so I am an absolute fanatic about anything that mimics the scientific process, which is you come up with a hypothesis, you develop something, or you develop a technology, and you're constantly trying to improve on that technology over and over and over, which is why I use these things, why I know they're going to continue to get better, and why I already believe in their value now. And this is, I think, something that's often lost in the discussion about, oh, does this really work? Does it? Yes. And the point is that you want to surround yourself with colleagues, with sponsors, if you need them or use them, with people in your life that are really, we hear the word optimization, but that are optimizing for the now, that also includes a balanced life, right? And is reasonable about, what you can do in a given day, and that are constantly trying to do better. These are the things and products and people that evolve health, that evolve science, that evolve creative activities. And, I can even look to Rick as somebody, or my friend Tim Armstrong. Tim writes a song every day. He had platinum records back when. He doesn't need to do that, but people who are just obsessive about their craft and lead balanced lives and are healthy, these are the people that we need to look to. Joe too. I mean, 3 or 4 3-hour podcasts per week, okay? Plus UFC, plus stand-up, plus he has a family, plus he's a healthy guy, and he just did the special. The special was super entertaining. I could feel the catharsis in some of that. And you can be sure he works like a demon. Yes, he does the cold plunge. Yes, he does his training. I know you do. I know Rick does. I know I do. I know Whitney does. I know Senra does. I know, there are many other examples. And so forgive me for not naming it. Jay Shetty works extremely hard to make their craft better and better and better. And so for people coming up, it doesn't mean you have to devote 12 hours a day to it or 100 hours a week, but you got to put in, chop wood, carry water.
I think everybody needs to pay the entry price at some point.
Yeah, chop wood, carry water. Everyone's got to do it.
Yeah. And there are very few shortcuts to the top. Is that not what it says on the steps of the mothership going up to the main stage? Have you ever been backstage?
I haven't been there yet.
Oh, okay. I think it says it's a long way to the top if you're going to do something. But I think
it's from the AC/DC song. It's a long way.
Probably. I mean, it's on brand with everything else. Andrew Huberman, ladies and gentlemen, dude, I really appreciate you. I love getting to catch up. It's so interesting sort of seeing where all of this is going, what you're doing with Andy Galpin's show, what you're doing with Matt Walker, what you're doing with Rob, with the book. My prediction is that you're going to do something. I know that your mum does kids
books. There's definitely good intuition. There's definitely some kids content and ideas. I've had a longstanding interest in animation and puppets. And that's about all I can say about that right now.
Awesome.
Because it's poorly formed. I'm not being cryptic. It still needs iterating, but I've had outreach from some amazing puppeteers and some amazing animators, and I'm super excited. I also just want to say, I'm both extremely grateful to you, and I kid you not, I am extremely in awe of what you've done and what you continue to do. You showed up like a force, and you are doing it. And
I feel a little bit, I've said this before, you know how in an Indiana Jones movie, the big sort of ceiling is coming down and he's going to get crushed underneath it. He's sprinting, sort of does a little slide underneath.
Yeah, and then grabs his hat.
Yeah, and then gets the hat. I feel like me and that hat are kind of just sneaking in at the last thing, and then now we're moving under our own steam.
Well, whatever you're doing, it's awesome, and I really appreciate you having me here today. Every time you've pop up on my screen. I'm like, yes, like I'm going to learn something from you. I'm going to learn something. It's your openness and also the fact that you have this razor-like mind to be able to pull things out. I wish I was as succinct. I can't even say the word. I wish I was as succinct as you. And I agree with those other guys. I wish you could run for president, but since you can't, you're just going to have to keep podcasting for us. So thank you so much for doing it.
I appreciate you, man. If you enjoyed that episode, you will love my full-length 2-hour masterclass on how to build muscle with Dr. Mike Israetel right here. Go on.